In the middle of the 2nd century, the Roman Empire reached the zenith of its territorial power under the Antonine dynasty. From the rain-swept hills of Britannia to the scorching sands of the Syrian frontier, a deceptive peace known as the Pax Romana united the ancient world. Year 161, Emperor Marcus Aurelius ascended the throne, inheriting a realm that seemed eternal and unshakable in its majesty. However, beneath this golden surface, the foundations of the old world were beginning to crack under the weight of unseen spiritual and political transformations that would soon erupt. Rome was a labyrinth of marble and shadow, where the state religion was the very heartbeat of social order and loyalty. To the citizens of the empire, the emperor was not merely a ruler, but a living god whose genius protected the safety of the collective. In the distant province of Roman Syria, the atmosphere was thick with the scent of spices and the tension of military occupation. Damascus and Antioch served as the vital lungs of the East, inhaling the wealth of the Silk Road while exhaling the rigid authority of Roman law. Within this cosmopolitan mosaic, a small and silent revolution was spreading through the underground networks of the common people. Christianity, still an illegal and mysterious faith, moved through the city like a quiet wind, touching the hearts of those who sought a kingdom beyond the Roman sword. The legal status of these early believers remained precarious, governed by ancient mandates that viewed their refusal to sacrifice as treason. While the elite discussed Stoic philosophy in their villas, the growing Christian communities prepared for a destiny that would require an ultimate and final witness. Daily life in the garrison towns was a constant ritual of discipline, where soldiers were required to honor the pagan gods. For a Christian soldier stationed in such a place, every sunrise brought a potential test of faith that could lead to either promotion or a public death. As the shadows of the Parthian War began to darken the eastern borders, the stage was set for an epic confrontation. In a world defined by the absolute power of the Caesars, the light of a single candle was about to challenge the darkness of an entire empire. In the narrow, sun-drenched alleys of 2nd century Damascus, a young boy named Viktor walked amidst the chaotic symphony of the East. Although the air was thick with the scent of Syrian spices and desert dust, his lineage belonged to the distant, rolling hills of the Italian peninsula. His father, Romanus, was a man carved from Roman oak, a strict official who viewed the world through the cold lens of imperial duty. To Romanus, life was a series of orders to be obeyed, a rigid architecture where emotion was a weakness and loyalty was the only currency. Growing up in a military household meant that Viktor's playground was often the shadow of the great stone fortifications of the garrison. While other children played with wooden swords, he watched the legionaries polish their bronze armor, learning early that a Roman's worth was measured by his ironclad discipline. Despite the harsh expectations of his father, Viktor possessed a quiet sensitivity that set him apart from the other noble sons. He would often linger near the ancient gates of the city, watching the weary travelers and wondering if there was a power greater than the golden eagles. Education for a youth of his status was a rigorous blend of Greek rhetoric, Roman law, and the brutal art of the blade. He was trained to speak with the eloquence of a senator, but to strike with the lethal precision of a professional soldier in the field. His Italian heritage was a mark of pride in the provincial landscape, a reminder of the central heart of the great empire. Yet, Viktor felt like a stranger in his own skin, caught between the glorious history of Rome and the mysterious, spiritual whispers of the Syrian night. The boy was destined for the legion, a path paved by the ambitious dreams of a father who sought to see him rise. Every morning, The clashing of steel and the rhythmic marching of boots served as the heartbeat of his childhood, forging a warrior's body and soul. Little did the young Viktor know that the discipline he acquired in the Roman camps would one day serve a different master entirely. As he reached the threshold of manhood, a silent call began to echo from the heavens, preparing him for a battlefield where no shield could protect. Within the stone walls of their Roman villa, a silent but profound war of spirits began to unfold during Viktor's formative years. While the midday sun scorched the Syrian earth outside, the interior of his home was a cold sanctuary of tradition and ancestral imperial pride. His father, Romanus, moved through the halls like a living statue of Mars, demanding absolute reverence for the ancient Roman gods. To him, the smoke of the pagan altars was the only legitimate fragrance of a loyal citizen, ensuring the favor of the eternal empire. Romanus viewed his son as a vessel for his own political ambitions, a future commander who would uphold the glory of the Caesars. He spoke often of the necessity of iron-willed discipline, believing that any deviation from the state religion was a dangerous and treasonous path. Yet, in the soft twilight of the evening, a different and gentler power would touch the young boy's growing heart and soul. His mother, Martha, would draw him close, her voice a rhythmic whisper that carried the ancient, forbidden stories of a carpenter from the distant Galilee. Martha lived a life of quiet peril, hiding her profound Christian faith behind the ordinary routines of a high-ranking Roman official's wife. She taught Viktor that true strength was not found in the edge of a sword, but in the boundless mercy of the Creator. While Romanus offered sacrifices to Jupiter in the public squares, Martha prayed in the secret silence of her private, candlelit quarters. She whispered the names of the martyrs, planting seeds of a spiritual kingdom that no earthly emperor could ever hope to conquer. Viktor found himself caught between these two powerful forces, the clashing of bronze armor and the tender resonance of a prayer. He watched his father's cold devotion to stone idols and compared it to the living, breathing warmth of his mother's hidden, illegal faith. These secret lessons from Martha became the invisible foundation of Viktor's character, preparing him for a destiny his father could never imagine. As the boy grew into a man, the whispers of the gospel began to drown out the thundering drums of the Roman legions. The journey of Viktor's youth eventually led him to the heart of Antioch, the shining metropolis of the Roman East. Amidst the marble colonnades and the sprawling villas of the elite, he began to ascend the steep and prestigious ladder of the imperial military hierarchy. Antioch was a city of intellectual fire and aristocratic splendor, where the air hummed with the sophisticated debates of Greek philosophers. For a young man of Viktor's standing, the city offered a stage to showcase the strategic brilliance and iron discipline he had mastered. He was groomed within the inner circles of the provincial administration, learning the complex art of governance alongside the science of war. His title, Stratolates, began to whisper through the corridors of power, marking him as a rising star in the emperor's vast legions. The aristocratic neighborhoods of the city were a labyrinth of luxury, where fountains played in courtyards and silk-clad nobles discussed the frontiers. Viktor moved through this world with a natural, commanding presence. Yet his eyes often betrayed a deep and restless spiritual longing. While his peers sought the favor of the governor and the pleasures of the theater, Viktor remained a figure of quiet intensity. He wore the ornate armor of a high-ranking officer, but beneath the polished bronze, he carried the heavy burden of a secret. His training was no longer merely about the sword. It was about the heavy responsibility of leading thousands into the fray. He studied the maps of the empire, understanding the fragile lines that held the Roman world together against the encroaching darkness of the East. The social expectations of the Antiochian elite demanded a public display of devotion to the Roman pantheon and the divine Caesar. Viktor navigated these treacherous waters with a calculated silence, his growing reputation as a brilliant general providing him a temporary and fragile shield. As he stood upon the heights of the city, looking out toward the Orontes River, the weight of his destiny grew. He was a master of the earthly legions, but the true battle for his eternal soul was only beginning in the shadows of the palace. The morning air in the military camp was sharp and cold, carrying the metallic scent of thousands of polished gladi. Standing before the golden eagle of the legion, Viktor prepared to utter the sacramentum, the sacred oath that bound a soldier's life to the emperor. This was no mere promise. It was a religious contract that transformed a common man into a living weapon of the state. As the centurion's voice echoed across the parade ground, the weight of the Roman world seemed to rest upon the shoulders of the young recruits. Viktor raised his right hand, his voice joining the rhythmic thunder of his brothers in arms as they swore absolute and eternal obedience. He pledged to follow the eagles into the heart of darkness, to sacrifice his very blood for the safety of the divine Caesar. Yet, as the words left his lips, a sudden and chilling shiver of doubt began to ripple through his hidden Christian soul. He had promised his life to a mortal king, while his heart belonged to the eternal Creator who ruled the stars and the seas. The sacramentum was the invisible chain that held the massive Roman war machine together through the centuries of blood and conquest. To break this oath was not just a military crime. It was an act of profound sacrilege against the gods of Rome. Viktor looked at the shimmering armor of his fellow soldiers, wondering how many of them carried a similar secret beneath their bronze plates. The camaraderie of the legion was a powerful force, yet it demanded a total conformity that his conscience could no longer accept. Every drill and every ritual became a battlefield where his military duty clashed with the gentle whispers of his mother's forbidden faith. He was a master of the Roman blade. But the true struggle was unfolding within the silent and dark chambers of his heart. This was the first true fracture in the foundation of his prestigious career. A silent declaration of an impending and inevitable spiritual war. The oath was taken, but the seeds of a higher loyalty were already beginning to bloom in the shadows of the garrison. In the sun-bleached outskirts of the Syrian province, a 16-year-old girl named Korona lived within a world of quiet and profound contemplation, while the Roman Empire hummed with the noise of trade and war. Her soul remained a secluded garden of deep, unspoken, spiritual truths. Known to some as Stephana, her name already whispered of a celestial crown that no jeweler on earth could ever hope to forge. She moved through the dusty streets with a graceful and ethereal modesty, carrying the heavy weight of a secret that defined her existence. Her childhood had been a tapestry of hidden prayers and the ancient, sacred stories of a kingdom far beyond the Roman horizon. Behind the closed doors of her family home, she learned that the true light of the world was not the sun, but the Christ. The time came for her to enter the sacred and traditional bond of marriage, a union arranged with a professional soldier named Vincent. He was a man of the legion, loyal to the eagles of Rome and the ironclad laws of the mortal pagan emperors. Their wedding was a ceremony of contrast, where the cold rituals of the state met the warm, hidden devotion of a young bride. Korona stood beside her husband, her heart a silent sanctuary of a different faith that Vincent could not yet perceive or understand. As the wife of a Roman soldier, her life became a delicate and dangerous dance between public duty and private, holy conviction. She managed the household with a diligent and humble spirit. Yet her eyes always looked toward the distant, shimmering heavens for a sign. Vincent saw in her a devoted and beautiful spouse, unaware that his young bride was a soldier in an army of a different kind. She prayed for him in the deep silence of the night, hoping that one day he would see the light. This quiet life of domesticity was merely the calm before a great and transformative storm that would soon engulf the entire Syrian garrison. Korona was a girl of 16, but the strength of an ancient martyr was already beginning to stir within her soul. The heavy iron gates of the Roman garrison in Damascus groaned, closing the world of the spirit behind walls of cold stone. Inside, the air was perpetually thick with the acrid smoke of burning fat and incense rising from the altars of the ancient, silent gods. For a professional soldier like Viktor, the barracks were not merely a place of rest, but a theater of mandatory pagan devotion. Every morning began with a formal salute to the bronze standards, where the golden eagles of Rome were worshipped as the ultimate source of victory. The sun beat down upon the courtyard as the centurions prepared the ritual sacrifices, their voices barking orders that demanded total religious conformity. To refuse the ritual was to insult the emperor himself, an act of defiance that carried the sharp and lethal scent of treason. Viktor stood in the rigid formation of the legion, his hand resting upon the cold hilt of his heavy gladius. He watched as his fellow soldiers stepped forward to sprinkle incense into the sacred flames, their faces illuminated by the flickering light of the imperial fire. This was the darkness of the barracks, a place where the soul was expected to surrender its autonomy to the state. The blood of slaughtered bulls stained the white marble of the altars, a grim reminder of a world that thrived on the mechanics of death. Beneath his ornate armor, Viktor's heart pounded against his chest like a trapped bird seeking the freedom of the open sky. He remembered the gentle prayers of his mother, Martha, and the forbidden stories of the one who sacrificed his own blood for all humanity. The pressure to conform was a crushing weight, a constant and suffocating test of his secret, illegal identity. Every nod of his head and every silent gesture was a dangerous gamble, a delicate dance on the razor-sharp edge of discovery and a public, brutal execution. As the smoke of the pagan sacrifice filled his lungs, Viktor felt the first stirrings of an irreversible and divine rebellion. The shadows of the garrison were long and deep, but a light was beginning to burn in his soul that no Roman fire could ever hope to extinguish. As the golden sun rose over the Syrian horizon, Viktor transformed into the living embodiment of imperial Roman might and prestige. His bronze breastplate caught the first rays of light, reflecting the image of a loyal general who served the eagles with absolute, unwavering devotion. During the daylight hours, his life was a relentless symphony of clashing steel, sharp commands, and the rigid mechanics of war. He moved through the garrison with a commanding presence, his every gesture radiating the calculated authority of a man who belonged to the Caesars. The Roman eagle, the Aquila, was the undisputed master of his public world, a symbol of a power that claimed the earth. Under its watchful gaze, Viktor led his men through the dust of the parade grounds, his face a mask of ironclad, professional indifference. Every salute he gave and every order he signed was a delicate thread in a web of necessary, strategic Roman deception. To the world he was the perfect soldier, a pillar of the establishment who upheld the ancient traditions and the sacred pagan laws. of the state. However, when the purple shadows of the Syrian night finally descended, the heavy mask of the Roman general began to slip. In the absolute silence of his private quarters, Viktor would remove his ornate helmet and kneel before a king who wore a crown of thorns. The flickering light of a single, humble candle replaced the roaring fires of the pagan altars he was forced to endure. In this secret sanctuary, the cross of the Christ became the true north of his soul, a silent anchor in a vast, stormy sea. He pored over the forbidden fragments of the sacred scriptures, his fingers tracing the ancient words that promised a life beyond the grave. Each prayer was a dangerous act of rebellion, a quiet declaration of independence from the temporary and crumbling glory of the Roman throne. This dual existence was a heavy burden that weighed upon his spirit, a constant and exhausting struggle between irreconcilable worlds. As the eagle of the day embraced the servant of the night, Viktor felt the cold breath of the inevitable confrontation drawing closer with every passing hour. Within the high-ranking circles of the Syrian administration, Viktor began to exhibit a subtle but noticeable detachment from the lures of worldly prestige. While his peers scrambled for imperial favors and larger estates, the young general found the taste of earthly power increasingly hollow and strangely bitter. His military successes had brought him wealth and a reputation that reached the ears of the governors, yet he felt a growing revulsion toward luxury. He began to view his ornate armor not as a garment of glory, but as a heavy gauge that restricted his spirit's movement. This internal shift manifested in small, quiet acts that puzzled those who followed his rising star in the Roman military hierarchy. He avoided the excessive banquets of the elite and began to distribute his private wealth among the invisible poor who haunted the city's dark and narrow outskirts. The soldiers under his command noticed a change in his leadership, a new and profound sense of mercy that was rare among Roman officers. He treated the common infantry with a dignity that suggested he valued their humanity far more than their mere utility to the imperial war machine. Viktor's detachment was a silent rebellion against the Roman obsession with dignitas, the pursuit of social standing at any moral cost. He spent hours in quiet contemplation, realizing that the temporary honors of men were nothing compared to the eternal recognition promised by his hidden celestial master. His fellow aristocrats began to whisper about his unusual lifestyle, wondering if the brilliant stratolates was losing his edge or perhaps hiding a dark secret. He remained professional and efficient, but his heart was clearly drifting away from the pagan altars and the cold marble halls. The temptation to remain a powerful general while keeping his faith a safe secret was a constant, whispering voice in his mind. Yet, Viktor knew that a man cannot serve two masters forever, and the glitter of Roman bronze was losing its luster against the brilliance of the truth. This period of internal preparation was a quiet maturing of his soul, a shedding of the old self before the arrival of the storm. He was intentionally loosening his grip on the world, making himself ready for the moment when he would have to surrender everything for his faith. The heavy atmosphere of Antioch grew suffocating as the imperial decree against the followers of Christ claimed its latest and most innocent victim. Saint Theodata, a woman of profound and quiet virtue, had been executed, her life extinguished by the cold and indifferent machinery of a Roman law. In a calculated move to strike terror into the hearts of the secret Christian community, the authorities ordered her sacred remains to be cast into the gutter. Her body lay abandoned in the dust, a silent and tragic testimony to the absolute cruelty of the pagan state. Passers-by hurried away, their faces masks of carefully constructed indifference. fearing that a single glance of pity might be interpreted as a sign of treason. The sun beat down upon the neglected martyr, whose only crime was a refusal to bow before the idols of stone. Viktor, moving through the city with his military escort, suddenly came upon the grim and heartbreaking scene that would forever haunt his soul. As a high-ranking officer, he was expected to view the sight with the detached and professional coldness of a true Roman warrior. However, as he looked upon the stillness of Theodata, a wave of profound and righteous anger surged through his veins like a river of fire. The injustice of the empire he served was no longer an abstract concept, but a bleeding and undeniable reality before his eyes. He saw the mocking smiles of the pagan guards and the silent, weeping shadows of the faithful, who watched from the distant and dark corners. The golden eagle on his breastplate seemed to grow heavy, a symbol of a tyranny that thrived on the blood of the holy. Every lesson of mercy his mother, Martha, had fusiled to do whispers in the night now demanded a public and dangerous manifestation in the light of day. Viktor knew that to honor this fallen saint was to invite the same lethal and inescapable wrath upon his own prestigious head. The tension between his prestigious military rank and his growing spiritual calling reached a definitive and irreversible breaking point in that dusty street. He could no longer be a silent observer of such darkness. The time for a bold and divine action had finally arrived. The heavy purple shadows of the Syrian night finally descended upon the city, masking the horrific scene in the dusty streets. Viktor stood alone in the cold silence, his hand resting on the hilt of his gladius, contemplating an act of ultimate and fatal defiance. To touch the body of an executed Christian was to declare oneself an enemy of the Roman state and the divine Caesar. Every professional instinct as a general warned him of the lethal consequences. Yet the fire of his hidden faith burned brighter than any fear. He moved through the darkness like a ghost, his ornate armor clinking softly as he approached the abandoned remains of Saint Theodata. The air was thick with the scent of decay and the lingering iron of blood, a grim reminder of the empire's absolute, cold cruelty. With a strength that was born from prayer rather than physical training, Viktor lifted the fallen martyr from the cold, indifferent earth. He carried her with a profound and silent reverence, as if he were holding a sacred treasure of a kingdom beyond the stars. He found a secluded spot away from the prying eyes of the pagan guards, where the ground was soft and the trees whispered. There, with his own hands, the high-ranking stratolates began to dig a grave, burying his prestigious military reputation with every shovelful. This was the first true death of the old Viktor, the proud soldier of Rome who sought the temporary honors of men. As he covered the saint with the protective earth, he felt a strange and overwhelming peace that no imperial promotion could ever provide. The act was a silent but thunderous declaration of war against the spiritual darkness that held the ancient world in its grip. He knew that the dawn would bring questions and suspicion, yet he had finally crossed the threshold from a secret believer to a martyr. As the first light of morning touched the horizon, Viktor returned to his quarters, his hands stained with the holy dust of service. The deed was done, and the invisible crown of glory began to shimmer above his head, unseen by the masters of the earth. In the heavy silence of the twilight, a shadow detached itself from the cold stone pillars of the military barracks. A figure appearing as a trusted comrade approached Viktor, his voice a smooth and melodic whisper that carried the subtle, lethal venom of a hidden and ancient serpent. The visitor spoke not of hatred, but of a deceptive and hollow peace that appealed to the general's logical mind. "Why throw away your glorious career for a public confession?" he asked, his eyes gleaming with a strange, dark intelligence that seemed to pierce the very soul. The temptation was a masterpiece of spiritual deception, suggesting that God only required the silent devotion of the secret heart. "Keep your rank and your power," the voice urged, "for you can do more for your faith as a general than as a broken, executed corpse." Viktor felt the weight of his prestigious position pressing against his conscience like a heavy and suffocating suit of armor. The prospect of serving his master in secret while enjoying the honors of the Roman world was a siren song that promised safety and deceptive worldly influence. This was the most dangerous battlefield the Stratelates had ever faced, where the enemy used reason instead of steel to attack. The suggestion to compromise was a subtle poison, designed to slowly erode the absolute and uncompromising foundation of his holy and growing spiritual commitment. "Heaven sees your intentions," the shadow continued. "So why provoke the wrath of the Caesar and the judge for a mere gesture?" The air grew cold as the whisperer offered a path of comfort, a life where faith was a hidden jewel rather than a burning torch. Viktor looked at his hands, still marked by the sacred dust of St. Theodata's grave, and felt a profound internal surge of resistance. He realized that a faith kept in the dark to save one's own life was no faith at all, but a form of betrayal. With a sharp and silent prayer, he rejected the whispering spirit, choosing the path of the cross over the safety of the throne. The shadow vanished into the night, leaving Viktor alone with the realization that the time for silence was finally and irrevocably coming to its end. In the deep, flickering shadows of a secluded Roman outpost, Viktor found a kindred spirit who shared his dangerous and divine secret. Claudius, a fellow soldier of high character, stood beside him, his eyes reflecting a spiritual fire that burned brighter than any imperial torch in the camp. These two warriors of the empire were bound by a loyalty that transcended the military oaths they had sworn to the Caesar. They met in the silent, dead hours of the night, their whispers creating a sacred space where the heavy weight of their Roman armor finally seemed to vanish. Together, they formed a spiritual pact, a covenant of brotherhood forged in the shared expectation of a coming and inevitable trial. They vowed to remain steadfast in their devotion to the Christ, promising to strengthen each other when the cold hand of Roman persecution eventually reached their door. Claudius spoke of the martyrs who had already ascended to the celestial kingdom, their blood serving as the holy seed of a new world. His words were a soothing balm to Viktor's weary soul, reminding the general that the path of the cross was never walked in total solitude. Their friendship was a masterpiece of divine providence, a hidden fortress of strength built within the very heart of the pagan military machine. They shared the few precious fragments of scripture they possessed, their hearts racing with the thrill of a truth that the world considered a lethal and treasonous superstition. As they knelt together in the dust of the garrison, they offered their lives as a collective sacrifice to the King of Kings. This was the true sacramentum, a higher oath of spiritual enlistment that prepared them for a battlefield where the enemies were not men, but principalities of darkness. They knew that their association was a death warrant if discovered by the prying eyes of the judge or the ambitious centurions. Yet the fear of man was a trivial shadow compared to the overwhelming and magnificent light of the eternal glory that awaited those who remained faithful. The pact was sealed with a holy kiss and a final, resolute prayer that echoed softly against the cold and indifferent stone walls. Viktor and Claudius stood up as brothers in eternity, ready to face the storm that was gathering on the horizon of the Roman East. The morning sun hung motionless over the Damascus horizon, casting long, sharp shadows across the silent stone courtyard of the military garrison. A heavy, suffocating stillness gripped the air as the ranks of the legions stood in rigid formation, their polished bronze armor gleaming with a cold, metallic brilliance. At the center of the assembly, a high-ranking herald stepped forward, unrolling a heavy parchment sealed with the unmistakable blood-red wax of the emperor. The sound of the unfolding scroll echoed like a crack of thunder in the unnatural silence, signaling a moment that would forever alter their lives. With a voice that carried the absolute and terrifying weight of the Roman state, the official began to recite the imperial edict. The decree demanded that every soldier and citizen must immediately offer a public sacrifice to the pagan gods to prove their absolute loyalty to the divine Caesar. The words fell like heavy stones upon the hearts of the secret believers hidden within the formidable ranks of the professional Roman army. For Viktor, the air grew thin and cold, as if the very breath of life was being snatched away by the arrogant demands of a mortal king. This was the definitive moment of truth, a divine intersection where the path of temporary safety and the road to eternal glory diverged. The eyes of the centurions scanned the faces of the men, searching for any sign of hesitation or the subtle shadow of a treasonous spirit. Time seemed to freeze as the final sentences of the firman echoed against the high, indifferent walls of the military complex. The choice was no longer a distant theoretical debate. It was a present, lethal reality that demanded an immediate and public manifestation of the soul's true allegiance. Viktor felt the gaze of his brothers in arms and the silent, expectant pressure of the massive imperial machinery surrounding him. Every second of his childhood training and his mother's secret prayers had led to this singular, terrifying point in the vast and ancient history of the world. As the herald finished reading and the smoke of the ceremonial fire began to rise, the world held its breath in anticipation. The silence that followed was not merely a pause in the day, but the quiet roar of a soul preparing to declare its eternal war on darkness. Driven by the guards into the high hall of judgment, Viktor stood before the imposing figure of Sebastian, the representative of imperial law. The air in the chamber was heavy with the scent of old parchment and the cold, unyielding authority of a world that worshipped order above all. Sebastian sat upon his marble throne, his eyes burning with a mixture of profound disbelief and a statesman's calculated, lethal fury. He looked upon the disgraced general not as a human being, but as a dangerous fracture in the absolute and sacred unity of the Roman state's divine machine. The judge's voice was a low, rhythmic growl that echoed against the polished stone walls, demanding a logical explanation for such madness. To him, Viktor's rejection of the imperial cult was an act of supreme ingratitude toward the empire that had granted him rank, wealth, and prestige. "Have you forgotten the glory of your ancestors and the safety provided by the eagles?" Sebastian asked, his hands gripping the arms of his chair. He could not comprehend a loyalty that surpassed the borders of the earth or a king who ruled without a physical golden throne. Viktor remained silent and composed, his stillness serving as a silent but powerful rebuke to the frantic and worldly anger of the official. This calm was interpreted by Sebastian as a supreme insult, a personal defiance that threatened the very foundations of the provincial administration he governed. The judge spoke of the brutal punishments that awaited those who dared to defy the Caesar's divine will and the state's ancient traditions. He painted a vivid and terrifying picture of the tortures to come. hoping to break the spirit of the soldier through the anticipation of physical agony. Behind the mask of the professional administrator, Sebastian felt a creeping and uncomfortable fear of the mysterious power that fueled Viktor's unwavering and steady resolve. He saw a light in the prisoner's eyes that no amount of imperial darkness or judicial threats could ever hope to extinguish. Finding no path to submission through words, the judge finally signaled for the heavy chains and the cold instruments of the state's ultimate correction. The era of debate had ended, and the dark, agonizing theater of the martyr's physical trial was about to begin in the deep shadows. The heavy doors of the judgment hall groaned once more, but this time, the shadow that entered was not a stranger. Romanus, the father who had raised Viktor to be a sword of Rome, stepped forward, his face a mask of cold, uncompromising imperial duty and bitter, personal betrayal. In a world where the family was the fundamental unit of the state, Viktor's spiritual rebellion was seen as a lethal stain on his father's honor. Romanus did not look upon his son with a gaze of mercy, but with the hollow eyes of a man who worshipped stones. Standing before the judicial bench, the father became the accuser, his voice trembling not with grief, but with the righteous fury of a pagan. He demanded that the state punish the child who had dared to choose a foreign, invisible king over the ancient traditions of his noble ancestors. "I did not give you life so you could bring shame upon the eagles," Romanus shouted, his words echoing like heavy hammer blows in the chamber. He viewed Viktor's faith as a disease, a parasitic superstition that had hollowed out the warrior he had so carefully and sternly forged. Viktor watched his father, feeling a sorrow deeper than any physical wound the Roman torturers could ever inflict upon his flesh. He saw a man who had sacrificed his own blood on the altar of a crumbling empire, blinded by the false glitter of temporary and worldly prestige. The judicial proceedings were a mockery of justice, a theatrical display where a father's testimony served as the final, lethal seal on a death warrant. Romanus offered no defense, instead providing the evidence of Viktor's secret prayers and his quiet, persistent refusal to honor the gods. The tension in the hall was suffocating as the witnesses watched a bond of nature being systematically shredded by the demands of a political cult. For Romanus, the survival of the Roman order was more sacred than the life of the son who had once been his greatest pride. As the sentence was prepared, the father turned away, abandoning his son to the cold hands of the executioners without a single glance back. The ultimate betrayal was complete. Viktor was now truly alone on the earth, but he was more closely held by his father in heaven. The heavy atmosphere of the judgment hall shifted to the cold, damp shadows of the torture chamber, where a single stone pillar stood. Viktor was stripped of his remaining dignity and bound tightly to the cold surface, his arms raised in a posture of forced and agonizing submission. The executioners stepped forward, their faces obscured by the dim light, holding the dreaded Roman whips weighted with lead and bone. A deep, anticipatory silence filled the room, broken only by the rhythmic breathing of the men who were about to dismantle a noble life for the Caesar. With a sudden whistling sound, the first lash descended upon Viktor's bare back, tearing through the skin with a savage and clinical precision. The physical shock was a wave of fire that threatened to consume his consciousness. Yet his lips remained sealed in a silent, holy prayer. Each successive strike was a calculated attempt to break the spirit of the stratolates, to force a cry of surrender from his lungs. Blood began to flow freely, staining the white marble floor of the imperial prison, a crimson testimony to a loyalty that transcended the earth. The onlookers watched in a mixture of horror and twisted fascination as the once proud general was reduced to a mass of torn flesh. His skin, which had once worn the finest silks of Antioch, now lay in tatters. Yet his inner resolve remained an unyielding and radiant fortress. Sebastian watched from his high seat, searching for any flicker of regret or a desperate plea for mercy in the prisoner's eyes. He saw only a terrifying serenity, a peace that defied the brutal mechanics of Roman punishment and the absolute power of the pagan imperial law. The rhythmic crack of the whip echoed like thunder against the stone walls, a dark symphony of state-sponsored violence and divine endurance. Viktor felt every agonizing sting, yet he offered his pain as a sacred sacrifice, uniting his suffering with the passion of his eternal, heavenly king. As the executioners finally paused to catch their breath, the broken body of the martyr slumped against the cold, unyielding stone pillar. The first stage of his trial was complete, and though his skin was shredded, his soul was being forged into a vessel of pure, celestial light. Abandoned in the suffocating silence of his lightless cell, Viktor lay upon the cold, blood-stained stone floor as a broken vessel. The agony of his shredded flesh was a constant, roaring sea that threatened to pull his weary spirit into the absolute depths of a final, crushing despair. Suddenly, the oppressive darkness of the Roman dungeon was shattered by a brilliance that no earthly lamp or sun could ever produce. A radiant light, pure and piercing, began to coalesce in the center of the room, transforming the damp prison into a sanctuary of celestial and holy power. From the heart of this divine fire, the archangel Michael emerged, a towering figure of celestial silver and unapproachable magnificent glory. His presence was a silent thunder, a majestic manifestation of the heavenly King's eternal care for those who suffer for the sake of the sacred and saving truth. The angel's wings were like shimmering shields of starlight, casting a protective and warm glow over the battered body of the martyr. In his hand, he carried no physical sword, yet his very essence radiated a strength that could dismantle the foundations of 1,000 earthly pagan Roman empires. With a touch as light as a summer breeze, the archangel reached out to the wounded soldier, his fingers trailing across the torn skin. Instantly, the fire of the pain receded, replaced by a cool, supernatural river of healing that began to restore the shattered and exhausted physical frame. No words were spoken in the traditional sense, yet Viktor's mind was filled with a profound and steady assurance of his victory. The celestial visitor imparted a courage that was forged in the presence of God, a divine fortitude that made the upcoming tortures seem like passing, trivial shadows. Viktor looked up into the eyes of the Prince of the Heavenly Host, seeing a reflection of the eternal peace that awaited him. He realized that the chains of the Caesar were merely illusions, for his soul was already soaring in the boundless, golden light of the spiritual and heavenly kingdom. As the vision slowly faded into the dim gray of the prison morning, a new and invincible strength settled in Viktor's heart. He stood up, his body healed and his spirit ready, for the commander of the angels had personally visited the soldier who refused to surrender his holy faith. The morning light was a cruel reminder of the physical world that Viktor was about to leave behind forever in the darkness. Judge Sebastian, frustrated by the soldier's miraculous recovery, ordered the most terrifying punishment designed to break the will of those who refused to see the Roman truth. 2 iron probes were heated in the flickering coals of the prison furnace until they glowed with a lethal orange brilliance. The executioners approached the bound general, their faces hardened by a professional coldness that ignored the divine and radiant peace radiating from the prisoner's calm and steady countenance. as the searing metal touched his eyes. A searing wall of fire consumed Viktor's physical vision, plunging his world into absolute shadow. The crowd held its breath, expecting a scream of agony, but the martyr's lips only moved in a silent, profound prayer that transcended the brutal pain. In that moment of total physical blindness, the external world of marble statues and imperial eagles vanished like a fleeting and hollow dream. The darkness was not a void, but a vast and shimmering canvas where the light of the eternal Christ began to shine with an unearthly brilliance. Viktor realized that the eyes of the body were merely windows to a temporary reality that was destined to crumble and fade away. By losing his sight, he had gained a celestial perspective, allowing him to perceive the hidden, golden architecture of the kingdom that no mortal hand could touch. Sebastian watched in a state of growing unease, seeing that the darkness had failed to extinguish the inner flame of the believer. The soldier stood tall, his head tilted toward the heavens, as if he were looking at a magnificent beauty that remained invisible to the pagan Roman masters. "You have taken the world from me," Viktor's voice echoed through the silent chamber. "But you have given me the stars of the Spirit." His words were a thunderous rebuke to the tyranny of the visible, a declaration that the soul possesses eyes that no fire can ever hope to destroy. The darkness of the dungeon became a sanctuary of divine revelation, where the martyr walked hand in hand with the angels of the Lord. Outside, the sun continued to shine upon the Roman statues, but inside the cell, a far greater and eternal light had finally and permanently dawned. The heavy iron doors of a massive furnace were flung open, releasing a roaring wave of heat that scorched the very air of the prison courtyard. Judge Sebastian, determined to erase every trace of the defiant soldier, ordered Viktor to be cast into the heart of the raging, hungry flames. The executioners hesitated, shielded by their heavy leather garments, as the orange fire danced with a lethal and chaotic fury within the stone chamber. They forced the blinded martyr toward the opening, believing that the absolute power of the elements would finally silence his persistent and holy prayers. As Viktor was thrust into the furnace, the crowd watched with a mixture of terror and dark pagan curiosity, expecting the scent of burning flesh. However, a profound and supernatural silence descended upon the fire, as if the flames themselves had recognized a far more powerful and ancient authority. Inside the inferno, the heat did not consume, but instead became a gentle and cooling breeze that surrounded the holy soldier like a protective cloak. The roaring of the fire was replaced by a rhythmic and celestial melody, as the laws of the physical world were suspended by divine command. Viktor stood amidst the glowing embers, his shredded garments remaining untouched and his wounded skin finding a strange, miraculous comfort in the heat. He felt the presence of a fourth figure beside him, a radiant protector who walked within the flames, just as in the days of Babylon. Sebastian waited for 3 long days, convinced that only ashes would remain within the cold and silent stone structure of the imperial forge. He ordered the doors to be opened, intending to scatter the dust of the rebel into the indifferent winds of the vast Syrian desert. When the heavy iron gates finally swung back, the gathered witnesses fell to their knees in a state of absolute and overwhelming spiritual shock. Viktor stepped forth from the darkness, his body radiant and his face shining with a peace that defied the logic of the entire mortal, pagan world. Not a single hair on his head was singed, and the scent of fire was replaced by the fragrance of celestial roses in the air. This was the ultimate defiance of nature's laws, a sign that the King of Kings held absolute sovereignty over the elements and the pride of Rome. Frustrated by the failure of fire and steel, Judge Sebastian summoned a master of dark arts, a sorcerer renowned for his lethal alchemical knowledge. This man prepared a piece of meat infused with a poison so potent that a single drop could extinguish a life in seconds. The sorcerer approached the blinded Viktor with a mocking smile, confident that the biological laws of the earth would finally succeed where the furnace had failed. He offered the tainted meat as a final meal, believing that the soldier's hunger would lead him to a swift, agonizing end. Viktor took the offering with a serene and steady hand, his internal spirit immediately perceiving the hidden presence of the lethal venom within the gift. He did not tremble or hesitate, for he felt the weight of a divine promise that protected those who walked in the truth. Before the silent and expectant crowd, the martyr made the sign of the cross over the plate, hallowing the food in the name of the Lord. He ate the meat with a calm dignity, while the sorcerer watched intently for the first signs of the inevitable, violent physical collapse. Minutes passed into a long and heavy silence as the prisoner remained perfectly still, his breathing rhythmic and his face radiating a supernatural, golden peace. The poison, designed to destroy the heart, found no purchase in a body that was already a temple of the living, eternal Holy Spirit. This was the living manifestation of the ancient promise found in the sacred Gospel of Mark, declaring that believers would remain unharmed by any deadly thing. The physical laws of chemistry were rewritten by a higher authority, leaving the pagan experts in a state of absolute and profound spiritual confusion. The sorcerer, seeing his most lethal creation rendered powerless by a simple prayer, felt the foundations of his own dark beliefs begin to crumble and fall. He fell to his knees, realizing that Viktor served a king who held the very keys to life and the cold, dark grave. The miracle of the poison was a thunderous proclamation that echoed through the corridors of the Roman administration, shaking the resolve of the pagan guards. Viktor stood as a living icon of divine invulnerability, proving that the King of Kings was the only true master of all creation. The sorcerer stood paralyzed in the center of the damp dungeon, his eyes fixed on the empty plate that should have carried Viktor to his grave. The lethal chemistry he had perfected over decades of dark study had vanished like a shadow before the rising of a spiritual sun. A profound and chilling realization began to penetrate his once arrogant mind, shattering the foundations of his alchemical pride and pagan superstitions. He had spent his life serving the forces of decay. Yet here was a man whose spirit governed the very atoms of the physical world. Slowly, the master of poisons fell to his knees in the dust, his hands trembling as he reached toward the garment of the prisoner. The mockery that had lived in his heart was replaced by a desperate, burning hunger for the truth that protected this humble, blind Roman soldier. "Who is this king you serve?" he whispered, his voice cracking under the weight of a sudden and overwhelming spiritual conviction. He saw the vanity of his spells and the hollowness of his dark rituals compared to the silent, radiant power emanating from Viktor's holy and calm presence. Viktor reached out to the fallen sorcerer, his touch carrying a warmth that was far more potent than any elixir or ancient potion. He spoke not of condemnation, but of the boundless mercy of the Creator who welcomes even the greatest enemies into the light of the eternal kingdom. In that singular moment, a disciple was born from the ashes of a bitter adversary, proving that no soul is beyond the reach of grace. The sorcerer discarded his jars of toxins and his scrolls of incantations. choosing instead to follow the narrow path of the crucified Lord. The transformation was a thunderous sign to the watching guards, a miracle of the heart that was far more significant than the survival of the poison. It demonstrated that the greatest weapon of the martyr was not invulnerability, but a love that could conquer the darkest human souls. Judge Sebastian watched with a growing sense of dread as his most trusted expert was reclaimed by the very faith he sought to destroy. The war was no longer just about a single soldier. It was a spiritual infection that was rapidly spreading through the imperial Roman hierarchy. The order was signed with the heavy, pitiless seal of the Roman governor, decreeing that Viktor be transported to the distant shores of Egypt. Under the scorching sun, the blinded soldier was bound in heavy iron chains, beginning a long and agonizing journey toward the city of Alexandria. 4 hardened legionaries led the prisoner across the unforgiving terrain, their boots kicking up the red dust of the ancient Levant. For Viktor, the world was a void of darkness. Yet every step he took felt like a holy pilgrimage toward the ultimate and final encounter with God. The journey was a masterpiece of physical suffering, designed to erode the spirit of the martyr through exhaustion and the constant clinking of iron. They crossed the shifting sands and the rugged coastal paths, leaving the familiar sights of Syria behind for the mysterious and vast landscapes of the south. Every evening, as the guards rested near the flickering campfires, Viktor remained in a state of profound and silent prayer. The rhythmic sound of the waves crashing against the Mediterranean shore served as a celestial melody, reminding him that the Creator's reach surpassed all human, imperial borders. Along the way, curious strangers watched the passing procession, wondering about the identity of the noble-looking prisoner who walked with such grace. Viktor did not speak of his pain, but his presence radiated a quiet and supernatural dignity that silenced the mockery of the pagan Roman soldiers. The transition from the province of Syria to the land of the pharaohs was a symbolic departure from his earthly life and history. He was being stripped of his last remaining ties to his homeland, becoming a wanderer in a desert that had seen the rise and fall of countless kings. As the towering lighthouse of Alexandria finally appeared on the horizon, the atmosphere grew thick with the humid breath of the Great Nile. Viktor felt the approach of a new and darker theater of trial, yet his heart remained an unshakable fortress of peace in the middle of the storm. The heavy chains bit into his wrists, but they could not restrain a soul that was already soaring toward the golden gates of eternity. The journey from Syria to Egypt was merely a temporary passage, a dusty road leading the champion toward his inescapable and magnificent crown of glorious martyrdom. The rhythmic sound of the Nile's flowing waters provided a somber melody to Viktor's life as a captive in the land of Egypt. Beneath the relentless heat of the southern sun, the blinded soldier walked along the riverbanks, his soul finding a sanctuary in the eternal and silent presence of God. Alexandria and its surrounding regions were a vast, vibrant mosaic of ancient wisdom and pagan rituals that seemed to ignore the prisoner's plight. Yet, for Viktor, the fertile soil of the Delta was a holy ground where he planted the invisible seeds of his final and absolute spiritual witness. Every breath he drew in the humid air was a whispered plea for the strength to endure the trials that still lay ahead of him. He did not ask for the removal of his heavy iron chains, but for the grace to carry them as a sacred and light burden for Christ. The pagan guards watched in confusion as their prisoner spoke to an unseen king, his face often illuminated by a joy that defied his surroundings. They saw only a broken man in rags. Yet Viktor was communicating with the very Creator who had once commanded the Nile to turn into blood. In the quiet hours before the Egyptian dawn, he would kneel in the dust, his prayers ascending like fragrant incense toward the celestial throne. He remembered his mother's teachings and his brother Claudius, drawing courage from the invisible communion of saints that stretched across the vast Roman world. The exile was a period of profound internal purification, a stripping away of every earthly comfort to reveal the diamond-hard core of his faith. He was a stranger in a strange land, yet he felt more at home in the spirit than he ever had in the palaces of Syria. His blindness had become a divine gift, allowing him to perceive the shimmering light of the kingdom that existed beyond the veil of physical reality. The pyramids and temples were merely temporary monuments of dust compared to the eternal and radiant architecture of the hope he carried within. As the day's labor ended and the stars began to pierce the desert sky, Viktor remained a steadfast beacon of hope in the darkness. The path of exile was leading him closer to the ultimate sacrifice, and he walked it with the unwavering and majestic dignity of a true heavenly conqueror. Within the heavy and suffocating silence of the Egyptian prison, news of the blinded soldier's spiritual power began to whisper through the city. Calliotropia, a woman of noble birth suffering from a long and incurable affliction, heard the tales of the prisoner who commanded the very forces of life. Driven by a desperate hope that surpassed her aristocratic pride, she sought an audience at the iron bars of Viktor's dark cell. She stood amidst the dust of the dungeon, her heart trembling as she gazed upon the man who had traded his worldly generalship for a crown of thorns. With a voice thick with tears, Calliotropia pleaded for a mercy that the finest Roman physicians and pagan priests had failed to provide. She did not see a common criminal in chains, but a radiant vessel of a higher authority capable of shattering the heavy chains of her own physical suffering. Viktor reached through the cold, rusted iron bars, his hand finding the forehead of the weeping noblewoman with a gentle and holy precision. He did not call upon any earthly magic or alchemical potion, but whispered the sacred name of the Christ, the eternal physician of all broken and weary souls. In that singular, transformative moment, a supernatural warmth surged through Calliotropia's body, extinguishing the cold fire of her long and agonizing disease. The heavy burden of her illness vanished like a dark mist before the rising sun, leaving her restored, vibrant, and filled with a profound and new light. The miracle was not performed for the sake of fame or worldly recognition, but as a tender sign of the Creator's boundless compassion. Viktor remained in his chains, his own physical blindness unchanged, yet he rejoiced in the liberation of a soul that had finally discovered the true and living God. Calliotropia fell to her knees in the dirt, her heart overflowing with a gratitude that no words in the Latin or Greek tongues could express. The prison walls seemed to glow with a celestial brilliance, as the grace of the heavens descended upon the most neglected and dark corner of the empire. This act of healing became a thunderous testimony that rippled through the high social circles of Alexandria and beyond. Even from behind the bars of a Roman cell, Viktor was conquering the world, proving that the Spirit of the Lord cannot be imprisoned by any mortal or imperial decree. While Viktor endured the brutal weight of his chains in the Egyptian heat, a profound spiritual awakening was stirring within the heart of young Korona. In her quiet home, she felt a mysterious and undeniable connection to the suffering general, as if their souls were woven together by a divine thread. The news of Viktor's steadfastness in the face of blinding fire and lethal poison reached her like a celestial whisper across the Mediterranean. she began to see the hollow vanity of her comfortable life, realizing that her own secret faith now demanded a public and courageous manifestation of its eternal power. Korona spent long hours in secluded prayer, her spirit navigating the same dark valleys that Viktor was physically traversing under the Roman lash. She heard his silent cry for strength within the depths of her own mind, a spiritual call to arms that shattered her remaining fears and worldly hesitations. The image of the brave Stratelates, who had discarded his prestigious military belt for the sake of the Christ, became a guiding star for her soul. She realized that the time for hidden devotion had passed, and the moment for a glorious, collective witness of the truth was rapidly and inevitably approaching. Her husband, Vincent, watched with growing concern as his young bride's eyes began to shine with a light that was not of this world. He saw a newfound and majestic resolve in her quiet movements, unaware that she was preparing to step onto a battlefield where no Roman sword could prevail. Korona began to speak openly of the heavenly kingdom to those who visited her, her words carrying a weight and authority far beyond her 16 years. She was no longer just a soldier's wife. She was becoming a beacon of divine hope for the persecuted and weary followers of the way. The spiritual resonance between the martyr in the dungeon and the girl in the villa created a bridge of light that the empire could not burn. She accepted the heavy reality that her path would soon join Viktor's in the theater of suffering, and she embraced this fate with a holy and radiant joy. As the sun set over her Syrian home, Korona stood ready to face the gathering storm that had already engulfed the brave Viktor. The awakening was complete. A single soul's sacrifice had ignited a flame in another, ensuring that the light of the gospel would continue to burn through the darkness. The heavy atmosphere of the public square grew tense as Korona stepped forth from the shadows of the crowd, her face radiating a celestial and unyielding light. While the Roman officials prepared the instruments of death, the 16-year-old girl stood as a pillar of divine and majestic defiance. Her voice, clear and resonant like a silver trumpet, shattered the oppressive silence of the pagan assembly and the arrogant expectations of the judge. "I am also a soldier of that eternal army," she declared, her words echoing against the cold stone walls of the imperial and worldly buildings. She did not speak as a fragile girl, but as a warrior of the spirit who recognized a king far greater than the Caesar. By claiming her place in the ranks of the faithful, she intentionally abandoned the safety of her home and the protection of her earthly, prestigious social status. Her husband, Vincent, watched in a state of absolute and paralyzed shock as his young bride publicly invited the lethal wrath of Rome. He saw a stranger in her eyes, a woman whose soul had been forged in a fire that no human law or military discipline could ever hope to control. The crowd murmured in a mixture of confusion and dark anticipation, witnessing the incredible courage of one so young and seemingly delicate. Korona stood her ground, her spirit already soaring above the dust of the square and the temporary, hollow threats of the pagan Roman executioners and officials. To the world, her rebellion was a form of madness, but to the angels it was a glorious and holy declaration of independence. She was stripping away the mask of a common soldier's wife to reveal the radiant and eternal armor of a true champion of the sacred saving gospel. "You may break this body of clay," she continued, her gaze fixed on the shimmering heavens beyond the Roman horizon, "but you cannot touch the soul." Her confession was a thunderous confirmation of Viktor's own sacrifice. creating a spiritual bridge that spanned across the vast and ancient lands of the empire. With those final, resolute words, the transition from a secret believer to a public martyr was officially and irrevocably completed in the light of day. Korona had joined the battlefield of the saints, ready to face the storm with the unwavering and magnificent dignity of a heavenly, immortal conqueror. As the judge's threats thundered through the assembly, Korona's eyes were suddenly opened to a reality that transcended the cold marble of the Roman square. The heavy clouds of the material world parted, revealing a vast and shimmering expanse of celestial light that no earthly artist could ever capture. Within this divine radiance, she beheld a sight that filled her young heart with an unshakable and holy joy. Two magnificent crowns of pure, celestial gold descended from the highest heavens, suspended by invisible hands of light that radiated a peace far beyond the comprehension of mortal and pagan men. These crowns were not forged with the temporary metals of the earth, but were woven from the very essence of the stars and the prayers of the saints. They shimmered with a brilliance that made the golden eagles of the Roman legions appear as hollow and dull shadows of dust. One crown was designated for the brave Viktor, who was suffering in the distant darkness of his Egyptian cell for the sake of the truth. The other crown, equally radiant and majestic, was reserved for Korona herself, signaling that her own journey toward the martyr's throne had been divinely ordained. "I see two crowns descending from the heavens," she cried out, her voice vibrating with a supernatural authority that silenced the mocking crowd. The vision was a celestial seal on her commitment, a promise of eternal victory that rendered the upcoming instruments of torture and death utterly powerless and trivial. The pagan officials looked up toward the empty blue sky, seeing nothing but the harsh sun, for their souls were blinded by worldly pride. Only Korona perceived the shimmering architecture of the kingdom, her face reflecting the golden glow of the reward that awaited those who remained faithful until the end. This vision acted as a divine anchor for her spirit, providing the courage she needed to face the impending storm with a smile of peace. She realized that the pain of the moment was merely a fleeting shadow compared to the weight of the eternal glory represented by those two crowns. With her gaze fixed upon the celestial prize, Korona stood ready to embrace the ultimate sacrifice alongside her spiritual brother Viktor. The two crowns remained visible to her soul, a constant reminder that the King of Kings was watching over his champions with a love that conquered the grave. Judge Sebastian stood frozen upon his elevated dais, his face pale with a mixture of confusion and a growing, unnameable dread. The absolute conviction in Korona's voice as she described the celestial crowns had pierced the thick armor of his worldly and cynical imperial Roman logic. He looked down at the young girl, searching for any sign of the madness or the hysteria he expected from a condemned criminal. Instead, he found a terrifying clarity in her eyes, a radiant and calm presence that made his own judicial authority feel strangely small and incredibly hollow. "Who is this child?" he whispered to his advisors, his voice trembling with an irritation that masked a deeper, internal spiritual disturbance. He had suppressed seasoned rebels and crushed powerful enemies, yet he was now being challenged by the quiet, majestic resolve of a mere 16-year-old girl. To Sebastian, the supernatural was a threat to the stability of the state, a chaotic force that refused to be categorized or controlled. He could not comprehend how a person so young could possess a courage that surpassed the bravest veterans of the elite Roman legions. The judge felt the eyes of the crowd shifting from his throne to the small radiant figure standing in the center of the square. His power relied on fear, but Korona's joy was a weapon that rendered the threat of the sword and the lash entirely ineffective. He questioned her lineage and her teachers, demanding to know the source of the forbidden wisdom that fueled her defiant and holy declarations. He sought a political or human explanation for a miracle of the spirit that had its origins in the highest and eternal heavens. Every answer she gave was like a sharp arrow of truth, bypassing his complex arguments and striking at the very core of his soul. The judge realized that he was no longer presiding over a simple trial, but was witnessing a profound and irreversible collision of two worlds. Driven by a desperate need to reclaim his dominance, Sebastian finally discarded the mask of a rational official for the cruelty of a tyrant. If he could not understand her spirit, he would attempt to destroy her body, setting the stage for a most horrific display. The judge, driven to a fever of desperate cruelty, commanded that 2 sturdy palm trees in the square be forcibly bent toward the earth. Under the strain of heavy ropes and the weight of the Roman guards, the vibrant trees groaned, their trunks arching like predatory beasts. This was a theater of absolute and mechanical horror, where the beauty of nature was perverted into a lethal and calculated instrument of state execution. The air grew cold with the anticipation of a violence so unnatural that even the sun-scorched Syrian dust seemed to tremble in silence. Korona was led to the center of these 2 arched giants, her delicate frame appearing as a small and fragile flower amidst the towering symbols of death. She offered no resistance, her spirit already anchored in the celestial reality of the gold crowns she had seen in her vision. The executioners bound her slender wrists to the tops of the bent palms with thick, unforgiving cords of hemp. The tension in the trees was a physical manifestation of the Empire's crushing weight, a silent and terrifying pressure that threatened to tear the very fabric of the physical world. Sebastian watched with a cold and clinical indifference, believing that this public display of agony would finally silence the girl's defiant and holy testimony. He sought to prove that the laws of biology and the strength of Roman wood were superior to the invisible grace of God. Every spectator held their breath, caught between a dark, pagan fascination and a profound human sorrow for the innocent 16-year-old martyr. The groaning of the wood echoed through the square, a somber and tragic melody that signaled the arrival of the ultimate and final earthly trial. Korona remained in deep prayer, her lips moving silently as she entrusted her soul to the king who had conquered the grave. She was not a victim of the trees, but a champion of the spirit, using the very instruments of her death to ascend toward the heavens. With a sharp and final command from the judge, the ropes holding the palms were suddenly cut, allowing the trees to spring back. In that singular and horrific moment, the earth was witness to a sacrifice of such magnitude that it would forever be etched in the holy stars. The silence of the Damascus square was shattered by a sound so violent and unnatural that the very stones seemed to groan in agony. As the ropes were severed, the 2 palm trees recoiled with a sudden and terrifying force, hurtling back toward their original and upright celestial positions. In that singular, horrific instant, Korona's earthly frame was subjected to a physical tension that surpassed the limits of human endurance. The fragile vessel of her body was torn asunder by the diverging wood, marking the definitive end of her brief but immensely powerful journey upon the dusty earth. While her physical form was divided by the cruelty of the Roman state, her spirit remained an indivisible and radiant whole. The blood that stained the sacred palms was not a sign of defeat, but the holy ink used to write her name in the eternal book of life. As the trees reached their full height, a soft and supernatural light began to emanate from the site of her sacrifice. The spectators watched in a state of absolute and paralyzed shock, realizing that they had not witnessed a simple execution, but a magnificent and holy birth into the heavens. Korona's soul, now liberated from the heavy cage of the material world, soared upward with the grace of 1,000 white doves. She ascended toward the shimmering architecture of the kingdom she had seen in her vision, leaving the hollow pride and the dark shadows of Rome far behind. The 2 golden crowns she had perceived earlier were now within her reach, shimmering with a brilliance that blinded the pagan officials. She had kept her faith through the fire and the wood, proving that a 16-year-old girl could conquer the most formidable and ancient empire of the world. Sebastian gazed at the scene with a hollow and empty heart, sensing that his victory was a profound and irreversible spiritual failure. He had destroyed the clay, but he had inadvertently released a light that would continue to burn through the centuries, guiding the weary and the faithful. The square became a silent sanctuary, a place where the air was thick with the fragrance of celestial roses and divine peace. Korona had completed her race, passing the torch of her unwavering courage to the blinded Viktor, who still awaited his own final and glorious encounter with God. The heavy iron gates of the Egyptian prison groaned open for the final time, revealing a world bathed in the golden, setting sun. Viktor, still blinded but guided by a celestial light within, stepped onto the execution platform with the grace of a conquering hero returning home. A strange and magnificent smile played upon his lips, a silent expression of joy that baffled the gathered Roman guards and the weary spectators. To them, he was a condemned man facing a brutal end. But to Viktor, the platform was a threshold to an eternal, radiant kingdom. He felt the warm Egyptian breeze against his face, sensing the spiritual presence of the young Korona waiting for him beyond the veil. The news of her heroic sacrifice had reached his soul like a fragrant incense, strengthening his resolve for the final, definitive encounter with the sword. The executioner, a man hardened by decades of state-sponsored violence, hesitated as he looked upon the serene and noble face of the former general. He saw no fear or bitterness in the prisoner's stance, only an unwavering and majestic peace that seemed to defy the very concept of death. Viktor's last steps were firm and rhythmic, echoing against the stone like a sacred drumbeat, signaling the arrival of a divine and holy era. He was shedding the last remnants of his earthly rank, preparing to accept a title that no emperor or judge could ever take away. He knelt upon the cold platform, his spirit already soaring high above the pyramids and the dusty, temporary monuments of the pagan Roman world. The physical darkness of his eyes was now completely irrelevant, for the brilliance of the celestial throne was becoming a vivid, undeniable reality. "Forgive them, for they know not the glory they reject," he whispered, offering a final prayer for the city that had witnessed his long and agonizing trial. His heart was a fortress of love, holding no room for the darkness of revenge or the shadows of earthly, human despair. As the heavy shadow of the blade loomed over him, Viktor tilted his head toward the heavens, his smile broadening into a radiant and final greeting. The struggle was nearly over, and the champion was ready to claim the golden crown that had been promised by the King of Kings. The heavy atmosphere of the execution grounds grew thick with a supernatural stillness as the Roman executioner raised his gleaming blade. The sun seemed to linger at the horizon, casting a final, golden aura around the kneeling figure of the general who had conquered the fear of death. With a single swift motion of the cold imperial steel, the earthly bonds that held Viktor to the material world were forever severed. In that fleeting second, the physical darkness of his eyes was replaced by the overwhelming and radiant brilliance of the eternal divine light of the Christ. His soul ascended from the dusty platform with the majestic power of 1,000 eagles, leaving behind the heavy cage of his mortal frame. He was no longer a prisoner of the Caesar, but a free and radiant prince of a kingdom that knows no boundaries or sunset. Above the ancient and war-torn lands of the East, the spirit of Viktor met the waiting and glorious presence of the young Korona. Together, they rose as twin flames of unwavering faith, their courageous witnesses having shattered the spiritual darkness that had long gripped the heart of the empire. The 2 golden crowns they had perceived in their visions finally descended, settling upon their brows with a shimmer that outshone the stars. This was the celestial seal of their victory, a reward for those who had traded the temporary honors of men for the eternal glory of God. The Roman guards looked upon the still body of the martyr with a sense of hollow and irreversible defeat, for they had failed. They had taken his life, but they had inadvertently released a spiritual fire that would continue to inspire the faithful through the long and coming centuries. Damascus and Alexandria, though separated by vast deserts and shifting sands, were now united by the holy memory of their shared sacrifice. The blood of the martyrs had become the sacred seed of the church, promising a future where the cross would stand far above the eagles. As their spirits vanished into the boundless depths of the heavenly sanctuary, a profound peace settled over the weary and ancient world below. Viktor and Korona were finally home, resting in the eternal embrace of the King of Kings, their names etched forever in the golden stars. The purple shadows of the Syrian night descended like a heavy, protective veil over the blood-stained soil of the execution grounds. In the profound silence that followed the Roman storm, a small and shadowy group of the faithful emerged from the dark, narrow alleys of the ancient city. They moved with the quiet and calculated stealth of those who walked between the sharp edge of life and the cold certainty of death. Every rustle of their simple garments felt like a thunderous roar against the backdrop of the sleeping Roman garrison and the indifferent imperial guards. These were the humble brothers and sisters of the underground church, driven by a loyalty that surpassed the terrifying reach of the Caesar's law. They sought the sacred remains of Viktor and Korona, intending to rescue the holy vessels of the Spirit from the indignity of public abandonment. By the flickering and uncertain light of hidden lanterns, they approached the site where the great sacrifice had been offered to the heavens. The air was still thick with the lingering scent of incense and the heavy, metallic iron of blood, a grim reminder of the day's brutality. With hands that trembled with a mixture of profound grief and holy reverence, they lifted the broken bodies of the majestic and silent martyrs. They treated the torn flesh as if it were precious silk, recognizing that these physical shells had once housed the very fire of the divine Amdashman. Every movement was a prayer, a silent liturgical act performed under the watchful and shimmering gaze of the distant, eternal stars above. They knew that discovery meant a similar and swift fate. Yet the desire to honor their fallen champions outweighed any fear of the Roman lash. The operation was a masterpiece of spiritual defiance, a quiet declaration that the church would never abandon its own to the dust of history. They carried the saints toward a secret, underground sanctuary, their footsteps leaving no trace upon the shifting and ancient sands of the Syrian desert. As the first pale light of the coming dawn began to touch the horizon, the martyrs were safely hidden from the pagan Roman world. The bodies were gone, but the legacy of their unwavering courage remained, a holy seed planted deep within the fertile and dark heart of the night. Deep within the silent reaches of the Syrian desert, far from the prying eyes of the Roman legions, a secret sanctuary was prepared. In a hidden limestone cave, the faithful laid the bodies of Viktor and Korona side by side, creating a place of eternal and holy rest. The air inside the chamber was cool and still, a stark contrast to the chaotic violence of the Damascus square. Here, the earthly remains of the martyrs were anointed with precious oils and wrapped in clean linen, as if preparing them for a magnificent celestial wedding with the King. This humble tomb became the foundation of a silent and powerful spiritual movement that began to pulse through the heart of the desert. Small groups of believers gathered in the shadows of the night, whispering the stories of the general and the girl who had defied an empire. The memory of their sacrifice acted as a divine spark, igniting a flame of faith that the Roman winds could never extinguish. This secret cult was not built on political power or worldly gold, but on the indestructible hope found in the promise of the coming, eternal, heavenly kingdom. Pilgrims began to arrive in secret, guided by whispers and the internal light of the Spirit, seeking a connection to the divine. They touched the cold stones of the tomb, feeling a warmth that emanated from the sacred legacy of the two champions who had conquered the grave. Every prayer whispered in that dark cave served as a brick in the invisible architecture of a new and vibrant spiritual community. The desert, once a place of isolation and death, was now the cradle of a holy devotion that would soon reshape the entire Roman world. To the imperial officials, this hidden gathering was a minor irritation, but to the angels, it was a thunderous declaration of victory. The martyrs had died, yet through their silent tomb, they were speaking more loudly than the most powerful senators or the Caesar himself in Rome. As the moon rose over the shifting sands of Syria, the first tomb of the saints remained a beacon of celestial light in the dark. The secret cult was born, marking the beginning of a transformation that would turn the blood of the martyrs into the seeds of a global faith. The heroic testimony of Viktor and Korona did not remain buried in the silent sands of the Syrian desert for long. Like a wildfire driven by a divine wind, the stories of their unwavering courage began to echo through the magnificent vaulted halls of the great church in Antioch. In the shadows of the city where the followers of the Way were first called Christians, the names of the martyrs became sacred. Priests spoke of the general's blinded eyes and the girls' celestial crowns, weaving their sacrifice into the very fabric of the liturgy and the holy traditions. Far to the south, within the intellectual and spiritual heart of Alexandria, the memory of the martyrs sparked a similar flame of devotion. The faithful gathered near the harbor, where the humid air of the Nile met the incense of their prayers, honoring the champions of the eternal King. These ancient cities, known for their deep wisdom and vibrant faith, recognized Viktor and Korona as the new guardians of the East. Their icons began to appear in secret chapels, depicting them not as victims of Roman cruelty, but as radiant victors draped in the light of the heavens. For the persecuted believers of Egypt and Syria, the duo became a symbol of a unity that transcended provincial borders and imperial decrees. The military discipline of the Stratelates and the pure innocence of the young bride provided a balanced and powerful image of the perfect Christian witness. Every year, on the anniversary of their final sacrifice. The litanies of the Eastern churches were filled with their names. The dark threat of the Roman sword seemed to lose its power whenever the story of the palm trees and the fiery furnace was retold to the weary and the faithful. The bishops of the East saw in these two martyrs a divine confirmation of the gospel's ultimate victory over the pagan world. They were no longer just historical figures, but living intercessors whose spiritual presence was felt during the most sacred moments of the divine and holy Eucharistic gathering. As the influence of Antioch and Alexandria spread, the legacy of Viktor and Korona was secured for all future generations of the world. They stood as the eternal protectors of the Orient, their light burning brightly as a beacon of hope against the fading and hollow shadows of the empire. As the Roman persecution intensified across the mainland, the faithful decided to protect the sacred remains of the martyrs by crossing the Great Sea. In the dead of night, the holy relics of Viktor and Korona were carefully placed upon a swift, wooden merchant vessel bound for Cyprus. The Mediterranean waves whispered ancient secrets against the hull as the ship glided away from the Syrian coast toward the western horizon. To the sailors carrying this divine cargo, the voyage was not merely a journey of trade, but a sacred mission to preserve the seeds of the eternal kingdom. A supernatural calm settled over the deep waters, as if the elements themselves were honoring the presence of the two champions of the Spirit. No storm dared to disturb the path of the vessel, and the stars seemed to shine with a brilliant, guiding light for the brave travelers. Within the small wooden chest lay the physical testimony of a faith that had conquered the furnace, the poison, and the Roman sword. The relics were more precious than any imperial gold, carrying a spiritual weight that could transform the entire spiritual landscape of the beautiful and rugged island of Cyprus. As the emerald coastline of the island finally appeared through the morning mist, the believers on board felt a profound sense of relief and joy. They were bringing the light of the East to a new home, ensuring that the legacy of the martyrs would remain safe from destruction. The ship dropped anchor in a secluded bay, far from the busy ports where the Roman officials monitored every arrival and departure with suspicion. The sacred remains were carried ashore with the same reverence that a priest would show to the most holy and divine altar of God. Cyprus, with its ancient mountains and fertile valleys, welcomed the saints as its new and eternal guardians against the dark forces of the world. The arrival of the relics marked the beginning of a new chapter, where the island would become a fortress of hope for the weary. Under the shade of the Mediterranean pines, the faithful whispered prayers of gratitude for the successful crossing and the safety of their holy treasure. The overseas journey was complete, and the light of Viktor and Korona began to illuminate the shores of Cyprus with a radiant, celestial brilliance. The echoes of the Syrian desert finally reached the marble corridors of the Great Palace in Constantinople, the legendary heart of the Byzantine world. Within the golden halls where emperors decided the fate of nations, the story of Viktor and Stephana was whispered with a profound and holy reverence. The city of the Caesars had transformed into the city of the Christ, and the once persecuted faith now sat upon the imperial throne itself. The court poets and the sacred chanters began to compose magnificent hymns, celebrating the young girl who had seen the two crowns descending from the heavens. Under the vast and shimmering dome of Hagia Sophia, the name of Stephana, the crowned one, vibrated through the incense-filled air during the divine liturgy. The Byzantine nobility, draped in silk and gold, bowed their heads in honor of the soldier's wife, who had possessed a courage greater than any legion. These hymns were not merely songs, but spiritual weapons that fortified the soul of the empire against the encroaching shadows of the Dark Ages. The melody of the Stephana chants carried the fragrance of the Syrian palms and the salt of the Egyptian sea into the very center of power. The emperor himself ordered that the accounts of their martyrdom be recorded in the royal Menologion, the sacred calendar of the saints of the realm. This act ensured that the memory of Viktor and Korona would be preserved in the eternal archives of the most powerful Christian state on earth. Icons of the duo, adorned with precious jewels and delicate silver leaf, began to illuminate the private chapels of the imperial family and the great patriarchs. They were seen as the divine protectors of the Byzantine throne, symbols of a loyalty that transcended the temporary borders of the earthly world. As the chants rose toward the celestial heights of the capital, the spiritual connection between the humble Syrian tomb and the magnificent Roman palace was complete. The martyrs had conquered the spirit of the empire that had once sought to extinguish their light with fire, poison, and the heavy sword. Constantinople became the guardian of their legacy, a golden bridge that carried the light of the east toward the distant horizons of the west. The Stephana hymns remained a constant melody in the heart of the city, proving that the crowns seen in a vision were now a reality. As the 9th century dawned, the focus of the sacred journey shifted toward the rising maritime power of Venice and the misty Adriatic Sea. Brave merchants, navigating between the worlds of trade and faith, carried the precious relics of Viktor and Korona across the turquoise waters of the deep. The sails of the Venetian galleys caught the salt-laden winds, driving the divine cargo toward the rugged and beautiful coastlines of the Italian peninsula. These sailors were the new messengers of the East, weaving the spiritual legacy of the Syrian martyrs into the vibrant fabric of the Western European world. Hidden beneath stacks of exotic spices and fine Eastern silks, the sacred remains traveled in a state of humble and profound secrecy. The Adriatic waves provided a rhythmic, percussive accompaniment to the silent prayers of those tasked with guarding the holy vessels of a faith that knew no borders. Upon reaching the lagoons of Venice, the presence of the saints acted as a spiritual anchor for a city destined for global and majestic greatness. The relics were welcomed with a mixture of merchant pragmatism and deep medieval piety, signaling a new era of protection for the Republic's growing empire. From the bustling docks of the Venetian canals, the light of Viktor and Korona began to spread inland toward the heart of the Italian mainland. The martyrs were no longer confined to the deserts of the Orient, but were becoming the silent patrons of a young and emerging European civilization. In the city of Feltre, tucked away in the shadows of the towering and majestic Alps, a sanctuary was prepared to receive the holy treasures. The arrival of the relics transformed this quiet alpine outpost into a significant center of pilgrimage, drawing the faithful from the vast and distant northern lands. This westward expansion was not merely a physical displacement of bones, but a strategic and divine movement of the spirit across the earth. The courage of the Stratolates and the vision of the girl now inspired the knights and the peasants of the West, bridging two different Christian worlds. As the church bells of Italy rang out to greet the arrival of the East's champions, the transition was finally and gloriously complete. The relics had found a new home amidst the marble and the pines, ensuring that the fire of their witness would burn brightly in the Roman heartland. The long journey from the sun-drenched ports of the Adriatic finally led the faithful to the base of the towering and majestic Alps. Here, in the quiet village of Anzou, the sacred relics of Viktor and Korona began their final ascent toward the rugged peaks of the mountain. Mount Miesna rose from the earth like a natural cathedral of gray stone, its sheer cliffs piercing the misty and cold northern clouds. To the weary travelers, this formidable rock was not an obstacle, but a divine and unyielding fortress designed by God to protect the holy remains forever. Carrying the precious chest up the narrow and winding paths, the pilgrims felt the air grow thin and remarkably pure in the heights. Every step taken on the jagged limestone was a testament to the enduring power of a faith that had traveled from the Syrian sands to the snows. The silence of the high altitudes provided a somber and magnificent sanctuary for the spirits of the general and the young, radiant martyr. The roaring winds through the alpine pines seemed to echo the ancient chants of the East, welcoming the champions to their new and permanent spiritual home. Upon reaching the high ridges of the mountain, the faithful looked down upon the fertile valleys of Viktor, seeing a world in need. They realized that the martyrs were placed here as watchmen, standing guard over the Italian plains from a vantage point of absolute and celestial spiritual authority. The rocks of Mount Miesna were chosen for their strength and their isolation from the chaotic and fleeting wars of the lowlands. Beneath the shadow of the peaks, the foundations of a sacred and lasting devotion were laid, transforming the wild mountain into a beacon of hope for all of Europe. In the cool shadows of the alpine evening, the relics were placed within a temporary stone vault, marking the end of their wanderings. The presence of the saints sanctified the mountain, turning the ancient limestone into a living altar that would soon draw thousands of pilgrims from the distant northern lands. As the first stars appeared over the sharp ridges of the Miesna, a profound and holy peace settled over the quiet village of Anzu. The martyrs had found their resting place amongst the clouds, proving that their light could shine from the highest peaks as brightly as from the desert. The ironclad knights of the First Crusade returned from the scorching deserts of the Holy Land, their banners torn and their armor scarred by 1,000 battles. Upon reaching the shadow of the Alps, they sought a spiritual father who understood the heavy burden of the warrior's bloody and sacred path. In the majestic sanctuary of Viktor, they discovered the story of Viktor, the Stratolatz who had once commanded the elite legions of Rome. To these medieval soldiers, he was not merely a distant saint, but a brother in arms who had maintained his holy honor amidst the chaotic storms of war. Kneeling before the sacred relics on Mount Miesna, the knights unsheathed their heavy broadswords, offering their blades to the memory of the martyr. They took a solemn and thunderous oath, choosing Viktor as their celestial patron and the divine protector of all those who fought under the sign of the cross. They saw in his refusal to worship the pagan eagles a supreme form of military discipline that transcended the simple commands of any earthly king. Viktor became the ideal of the Christian knight, a figure of absolute strength who had surrendered his life to protect the eternal and saving truth of the heavens. The chronicles of the crusade began to echo with tales of his invisible presence on the battlefield, providing courage to the weary and light to the lost. His image was etched onto shields and engraved upon sword pommels, serving as a spiritual shield against the dark and encroaching shadows of the world. These hardened men of war recognized that the greatest victory was not the capture of a city, but the conquest of one's own soul through sacrifice. Viktor's martyrdom provided a moral compass for the emerging chivalric orders, blending the harsh reality of the soldier with the radiant purity of the devoted saint. The cult of the soldier patron spread rapidly through the feudal courts of Europe, carried by the returning survivors of the Eastern campaigns. From the castles of France to the mountain fortresses of Italy, the name of Viktor was invoked as a source of invincible and holy fortitude in the face of death. As the knights departed for their distant estates, they left behind a legacy of steel and prayer that would endure for many centuries. The general of Rome had become the commander of the medieval heart, proving that true leadership is a flame that burns forever in the kingdom of the radiant, eternal King. In the year 1096, as the fires of the First Crusade ignited the soul of Europe, the foundations of a magnificent sanctuary were laid upon Mount Misna. This grand basilica was envisioned as a celestial fortress, a physical manifestation of the eternal glory belonging to the holy martyrs. The architects sought to marry the sturdy strength of the Romanesque style with the mystical, radiant elegance of the Byzantine East. Massive stone walls, designed to endure the weight of centuries, were crowned with delicate arches that whispered of the golden domes found in distant, sacred Constantinople. Every block of limestone was carved with a holy precision, reflecting a world where art was the primary language of divine devotion. The structure rose toward the alpine clouds like a silent prayer, transforming the jagged mountain peak into a radiant throne for the stratolates and his companion. Inside the hallowed halls, the dim light of the north met the shimmering influence of the Orient through narrow, strategic windows. The interior was a masterpiece of spiritual geometry, where the heavy shadows of the earthly realm were systematically conquered by the invading golden rays of the morning sun. The frescoes upon the vaulted ceilings depicted the fiery furnace and the descending crowns with a vivid, terrifying beauty. Pilgrims who entered this sacred space felt as though they were stepping out of time and into a realm where the physical and the spiritual were perfectly and permanently entwined. This basilica served as a bridge between the dusty roads of Syria and the cold, emerald valleys of the Italian Alps. It was a place where the Latin heart and the Greek spirit embraced, proving that the sacrifice of the saints could unite a fragmented and often divided Christian world. The central altar was positioned directly above the sacred relics, acting as a spiritual conduit between the earth and the heavens. Here, the prayers of the knights and the common folk rose together, carried by the incense toward the ears of the King, who reigns beyond the highest golden stars. As the final stones were placed and the bells rang across the valley of Feltr, the sanctuary stood as an invincible monument of faith. The Basilica of 1096 was not merely a building of stone and mortar, but a living icon of a love that had successfully conquered the grave. Within the sacred silence of the basilica, the cold stone walls began to breathe through the vibrant colors of magnificent frescoes. Skilled artists, trained in the innovative and emotional school of the great Giotto, arrived to translate the ancient Syrian martyrdom into a visual, heavenly masterpiece. Using pigments ground from the very earth and lapis lazuli from distant lands, they painted the epic journey of the soul. The static figures of the past were replaced by faces that wept, prayed, and radiated a profound human emotion, bridging the gap between the divine and the mortal. One vast panel depicted the blinding of Viktor, where the orange fire of the probes seemed to flicker with a terrifying reality. Yet, the artist captured a supernatural light in the martyr's eyes, a celestial vision that proved the external darkness was merely a veil over a greater truth. Beside the general, the figure of Korona was rendered with a delicate and majestic grace as she pointed toward the sky. The two golden crowns were painted with such brilliant detail that they appeared to hover in the actual air of the chapel, illuminating the shadows of the mountain. These frescoes served as a Bible for the poor, a visual biography for the thousands of pilgrims who could not read the Latin scrolls. Through the power of the brush, the illiterate peasant and the noble knight could witness the trial, the furnace, and the final, glorious victory. The perspective of the Jotesque masters created an architectural depth that seemed to pull the viewer into the very streets of ancient Damascus. The worshippers were no longer mere observers, but became witnesses to the sacrifice, feeling the tension of the palm trees and the heat of the Syrian sun. Every halo was a sun of gold leaf, casting a permanent and holy radiance over the altar, where the sacred relics rested in peace. The colors did not merely decorate the walls. They sanctified the space, turning the Alpine sanctuary into a shimmering mirror of the eternal and radiant heavenly kingdom. As the final strokes were applied, the Mount Miesna Basilica became a living icon of the faith's endurance through the long centuries. The visual biography of Viktor and Korona stood as a silent, painted sermon, echoing the glory of the King of Kings until the end of time. In the twilight of the first millennium, Emperor Otto III looked toward the ancient ruins of Rome with a vision of a restored and holy Christian empire. He sought to gather the most potent spiritual treasures of the world to fortify his throne with the invincible power of the saints. Driven by a profound and mystical passion, the young sovereign became fascinated by the legendary courage of the Stratolates Viktor and the radiant Korona. To Otto, these relics were not merely dry bones, but living conduits of divine authority that could legitimize his rule over the vast, fragmented European lands. He traveled across the rugged Italian landscapes, moving with a small, elite retinue of scholars and knights who shared his dream of a sacred Roman rebirth. The emperor believed that by possessing the remains of these Eastern martyrs, he could bridge the gap between the Greek spirit and Latin strength. Upon reaching the Alpine sanctuaries, Otto approached the sacred relics with a humility that surprised his imperial court and the local bishops alike. He knelt in the dust, trading his golden crown for a moment of silent, tearful prayer, recognizing a majesty far greater than his own worldly, political power. The emperor ordered that a portion of the holy remains be transported to Aachen, the legendary capital of Charlemagne, to serve as a spiritual foundation. He envisioned a network of light connecting the major cities of his empire, fueled by the unwavering and ancient testimony of the brave, blinded Roman soldier. Otto's obsession with the relics was a strategic attempt to infuse the cold mechanics of imperial administration with the warm, vibrant blood of the martyrs. He wanted the laws of his realm to reflect the divine justice that Viktor had served, creating a society anchored in the eternal, heavenly truth. Under his patronage, the cult of Saint Korona began to spread into the Germanic heartlands, where she was honored as a guardian of the imperial treasury. The emperor saw her as a celestial treasurer, one who protected not only physical gold, but the priceless spiritual wealth of the entire Christian Roman people. As the relics were carried toward the north, Otto felt the pulse of a new Rome beginning to beat within the dark forests of Europe. The passion of a single emperor had ensured that the light of Viktor and Korona would illuminate the halls of power for many centuries to come. In the year 997, the sacred dust of Damascus finally reached the hallowed gates of Aachen, the majestic capital of Charlemagne. Under the watchful eyes of Emperor Otto III, the relics of Viktor and Korona were welcomed as the most precious jewels of the entire Christian world. The journey from the sun-drenched east to the cold, northern heart of Europe was not merely a physical passage of time and distance. It was the movement of a divine fire that had survived the Roman sword and the desert winds, now ready to illuminate the halls of the great palace. Within the magnificent Palatine Chapel, the air was thick with the scent of holy incense and the silent prayers of the imperial court. The relics were placed in a golden shrine, signaling a profound spiritual union between the ancient martyrs of Syria and the young, emerging power of the West. The emperor knelt before the altar, recognizing that his earthly authority required the invisible and celestial support of the saints. He envisioned Aachen as a new Jerusalem, a city fortified by the unwavering courage of the blinded general and the girl who had seen the two glorious and descending crowns of gold. The clergy of Aachen began to incorporate the story of the martyrs into the solemn rites of the imperial liturgy. They spoke of the furnace and the palms in the shadows of the massive stone arches, weaving the legacy of the Orient into the very fabric of the Germanic and Latin traditions. For the common people of the North, the presence of these relics provided a tangible link to the distant lands where the Christ had walked. The Syrian martyrs were no longer foreign strangers, but had become the close and holy protectors of the people living within the vast, dark European forests. This transfer of the holy remains served as a spiritual cornerstone for the Holy Roman Empire, grounding its political ambitions in divine sacrifice. The bones of Viktor and Korona were seen as guardians of the treasury and the crown, ensuring that the light of faith would remain at the center. As the bells of the great cathedral echoed through the misty streets of Aachen, a new chapter of devotion officially began. The fire of the East had found a permanent home in the West, proving that the testimony of the martyrs could conquer the hearts of emperors and commoners alike forever. Beneath the intricate and ancient stone floors of the Aachen Cathedral, a profound and heavy silence reigned for many long centuries. The sacred relics of the martyrs, once the pride of emperors, had slipped into the dark shadows of history, hidden away under massive and forgotten slabs of marble. The cold darkness of the cathedral's crypt acted as a silent guardian, preserving the holy treasures from the chaotic storms of war and time. Generations of priests and pilgrims walked above the hidden vault, unaware that a celestial fire was resting just a few feet beneath their very weary footsteps. As the 19th century gave way to the 20th, a group of dedicated scholars began to peel back the layers of the past. They sought the lost legacy of Otto III, guided by cryptic medieval manuscripts that whispered of a magnificent treasure concealed within the heart of the imperial and sacred foundations. With a mixture of academic curiosity and spiritual dread, the workers slowly lifted the heavy, dust-covered stones of the lower sanctuary. The air within the crypt grew thick with the scent of ancient earth and the metallic chill of a place that had been sealed since the days of the Crusaders. Suddenly, the flickering light of their lanterns revealed the shimmering edges of a long-lost and magnificent leaden sarcophagus. It lay undisturbed in the cold embrace of the crypt, a silent witness to the passage of empires and the slow, inevitable fading of mortal and worldly human memory into the gray mist. The discovery sent a spiritual shockwave through the halls of the cathedral as the names of Viktor and Korona were spoken once again. The forgotten treasure was not made of gold or silver, but consisted of the holy bones that had once defied the might of ancient and pagan Rome. Scholars and theologians gathered around the open vault, their hearts trembling as they recognized the immense significance of the find. The dark crypt had not been a prison, but a sacred cocoon where the light of the East had waited patiently for the appointed time of its glorious and new revelation. As the relics were carefully lifted from their marble prison, the spiritual connection between the modern world and the ancient desert was restored. The darkness of the crypt had finally been conquered by the light of discovery, proving that the glory of the saints can never be truly lost or permanently buried. In the 14th century, the magnificent city of Prague rose as a golden beacon of culture and faith under the visionary rule of Charles IV. The Bohemian king, a collector of sacred mysteries, sought to weave the radiant legacy of Saint Korona into the very crown of his beloved kingdom. He envisioned Prague as a new spiritual center, where the light of the East and the strength of the West would converge in harmony. By bringing the relics and the devotion of Korona to the Vltava's banks, he crowned his capital with a celestial protection that transcended earthly walls. Under the rising towers of St. Vitus Cathedral, the name of the martyr was whispered with a newfound and royal elegance. Charles IV, a man of deep piety, recognized in Korona a guardian of the imperial treasury and a symbol of the steadfastness required to lead a vast and diverse Christian empire. The Bohemian nobility and the learned scholars of the new university gathered to witness the elevation of the saint's memory. They saw her not just as a figure from the ancient desert, but as a living pillar of virtue, whose crown of gold was a promise of Bohemia's own eternal and majestic glory. Exquisite altars were dedicated to her honor, shimmering with the famous Bohemian glass and the dark, rich garnets of the land. These artistic tributes served as a bridge between the dusty palms of Syria and the Gothic spires of Prague, uniting two worlds through the language of holy and timeless beauty. The king believed that the prosperity of his realm was divinely linked to the intercession of the brave martyrs who had defied Rome. Korona became the patroness of the royal mint, her image serving as a spiritual seal of authenticity over the gold and silver that fueled the empire's grand and ambitious expansion. As the Vltava River reflected the shimmering lights of the city, the hymns for Saint Korona echoed through the narrow stone streets. Her story became a permanent part of the Bohemian soul, providing a source of courage and hope for a people destined to face the coming storms of European and religious history. Through the patronage of Charles IV, the transition of the saint from a desert martyr to a royal protectress was officially completed. The light of the East had found a magnificent throne in the heart of Europe, ensuring that the two crowns would shine forever over the rooftops of the Golden City. High within the mist-covered peaks of the Austrian and Bavarian Alps, the legacy of Saint Korona found a humble yet powerful sanctuary among the rugged mountain folk. In these isolated valleys, where the winter snows lasted for months, her name became a whispered prayer for protection and survival. The hardy peasants and weary woodcutters looked to the martyr as a celestial guardian who understood the harsh reality of a life lived against the elements. They saw in her steadfast spirit a source of divine warmth, believing that her intercession could shield their small wooden homes from the mountain's fury. Within the dark and dangerous shafts of the Bavarian salt mines, the workers sought the saint's favor to guide them safely through the treacherous earth. She became the patroness of those who labored in the deep silence, her light serving as a spiritual lamp amidst the cold, oppressive darkness. Small stone chapels, adorned with simple yet profound hand-carved icons, began to appear along the winding and narrow alpine trails. These high-altitude shrines served as beacons of hope for travelers, marking the presence of a holy protector who watched over the paths of the faithful and the lost alike. During the seasonal festivals, the mountain villages echoed with traditional hymns that blended ancient Syrian lore with the melodic sounds of the German heartland. The story of the two golden crowns was retold by the flickering firelight, inspiring a new generation to maintain their faith despite the world's heavy burdens. The rural devotion to Korona was not built on imperial decrees, but on the genuine and deep gratitude of a people who witnessed her quiet miracles. She was the one who ensured a successful harvest and protected the precious livestock, becoming the silent heartbeat of the entire alpine agricultural community. As the morning sun illuminated the jagged ridges of the Alps, the ringing of the village bells signaled a renewed commitment to the saints' holy path. The martyrs of the East had truly become the children of the West, embraced by the mountains as if they had always belonged to this land. Through the centuries, the bond between the Bavarian peaks and the Syrian palms remained an unbreakable and magnificent testament to the universality of the spirit. Korona had conquered the heights, proving that her radiant crown could shine as brightly in a mountain blizzard as in the desert sun's fierce and ancient heat. In the intricate tapestry of human history, the Latin word Korona emerged as a bridge between the celestial and the material realms. While it represented the radiant crown of the martyr, it also became the prestigious name for the currencies that fueled the commerce of vast and powerful European empires. This linguistic coincidence was not seen as a mere accident by the medieval mind, but as a mystical sign of the saint's authority over earthly wealth. The golden coins bearing the name of the crown were believed to be under the silent and vigilant protection of the Syrian martyr herself. From the Austrian krone to the various crowns of the north, the physical money of nations echoed the spiritual reward promised in Korona's ancient vision. The martyr became the unofficial guardian of the mint, ensuring that the integrity of the currency reflected the divine and unyielding truth of the heavens. Merchants and bankers began to invoke her name during times of economic uncertainty, seeking a stability that surpassed the shifting tides of the market. They saw her as the celestial treasurer who could preserve the value of their labor and shield the honest worker from the shadows of sudden poverty. The image of the crown on the coin served as a constant reminder that all earthly prosperity is but a fleeting shadow of the eternal riches. Even as the currency changed hands in the busy markets of Europe, the name Korona whispered of a treasure that no thief could ever hope to steal. In the hearts of the faithful, the name was a dual symbol of survival in this world and ultimate victory in the next. They recognized that the same word that dictated the price of bread also described the glorious prize awaiting those who remained steadfast through the trials of the material and mortal life. The connection between the saint and the currency transformed the act of trade into a moment of subtle spiritual reflection for the common people. Every exchange of a korona was a silent acknowledgement of the martyr's legacy, weaving the sacred into the very fabric of daily, secular, and commercial human existence. As the centuries passed, the name remained etched in the ledgers of history as a testament to the enduring power of a single word. Korona had conquered the world of finance not through greed, but by sanctifying the crown, proving that true value is found in the light of the radiant, eternal King, in the dimly lit taverns and the deep, silent forests of Central Europe. A strange and mystical devotion emerged among those who sought hidden wealth. These treasure hunters looked to Saint Korona as their celestial guide, believing her crown could illuminate the darkest secrets buried beneath the heavy ancient earth. The Kronengebet, or the prayer of the crown, became a whispered ritual used by those who dared to search for lost hoards and forgotten silver. They believed that the saint, who had surrendered all worldly possessions for a heavenly reward, held the spiritual keys to the treasures of the material and mortal world. To these seekers, the earth was not merely soil and rock, but a vast and silent vault guarded by unseen forces and ancient spirits. They invoked Korona's name to shield them from the dark guardians of the underworld, hoping her radiant light would lead them to the shimmering gold of the past. This folk tradition transformed the martyr into a bridge between the spiritual heights and the profound, cavernous depths of the physical world. While the church spoke of her soul's ascent, the common people whispered of her power to reveal the location of riches hidden away from the prying eyes of men. Within the dusty pages of forbidden grimoires and secret family ledgers, the Tak Duase was recorded as a powerful tool for the ambitious and the desperate. It was a plea for divine favor in the pursuit of fortune, blending the sacred legacy of the saint with the primal human desire for gold. Even the most hardened miners, who labored in the cold veins of the earth, carried small tokens of the saint to ensure a successful and safe discovery. They saw her as a beacon in the suffocating darkness, a protector whose name could turn a barren stone wall into a radiant path of precious and glittering ore. The authorities of the church often viewed these treasure-seeking rituals with suspicion, yet the Kronengebet remained a resilient part of the rural and mystical landscape. The people refused to separate the saint from the treasure, seeing her crown as the ultimate symbol of both spiritual and material and earthly abundance. As the moon rose over the excavation sites, the silent prayers of the hunters drifted into the cold night air toward the eternal heavens. The legend of Saint Korona continued to grow, proving that her name possessed a mysterious and magnetic power over the hearts and the hidden fortunes of the vast ancient world. Within the bustling and dimly lit taverns of medieval Europe, a peculiar and vibrant devotion began to circulate among those who lived by the roll of the dice. These men of chance looked to Saint Korona as their secret and celestial ally in the unpredictable world of fortune. The ancient martyr, whose very name whispered of the royal crown and the golden coin, became the unofficial patroness of the gambler and the risk-taker. They believed that her divine favor could turn the tide of a losing hand or guide the spinning wheel toward a majestic victory. In the quiet corners of the gaming halls, a hidden prayer for luck was often whispered to the saint, who had traded all earthly wealth. It was a strange and human contradiction, seeking the blessing of a holy martyr to win the temporary and shifting treasures of the world. The legend of the money-bringing saint spread like a silent wildfire through the trade routes and the crowded marketplaces of the continent. Korona was no longer just a figure of suffering, but a vibrant symbol of the mysterious and sudden abundance that could descend from the heavens. Simple talismans bearing her image were often carried in the pockets of those who dared to stake their livelihoods on a single moment. They saw her crown as a beacon of prosperity, a spiritual shield against the cold and crushing shadows of debt and the bitter sting of ruin. While the stern theologians in the great cathedrals frowned upon such worldly petitions, the common people embraced the saint with a desperate and sincere affection. To them, she was a compassionate intercessor who understood the primal human need for security and the joy of an unexpected golden harvest. This folk belief transformed the sacred narrative of martyrdom into a practical and everyday tool for navigating the harsh realities of the economy. The name of Korona became synonymous with the thrill of the win and the hope of a fortune that could change a person's life forever. As the dice clattered across the wooden tables, the silent invocation of the saint remained a constant melody in the hearts of the hopeful. The legend endured through the long centuries, proving that the crown of the martyr possessed a magnetic and eternal power over the worldly dreams of men. As the cold and analytical winds of the Enlightenment began to blow across the European continent, the ancient and mystical devotions of the people faced a new and formidable enemy. The Age of Reason sought to dismantle the sacred bridge between the saintly crowns and the hidden treasures. High-ranking church officials, influenced by the rising tide of rationalism, launched a systematic war against what they labeled as dangerous and superstitious practices. They viewed the secret prayers for gold and the rituals of the treasure hunters as a dark perversion of the true and holy faith. The Kronengebet and other folk traditions associated with Saint Korona were strictly forbidden under the threat of severe and public ecclesiastical punishment. The majestic name of the martyr, once a source of hope for the gambler and the miner, was now being cleansed of its earthly, magical associations. Bishops issued solemn decrees from their marble thrones, demanding that the faithful return to a more intellectual and austere form of worship. They sought to decouple the spiritual legacy of the Syrian desert from the primal human desire for sudden wealth and the mysterious secrets of the ancient, deep earth. Sacred images were often removed from rural shrines, and the forbidden grimoires containing the crown prayers were hunted down, sung, and committed to the cleansing fires. The authorities feared that the saint's intercession was being bartered like a common commodity in the dark and smoky taverns of the poor. Yet, despite the heavy pressure of the official hierarchy and the cold logic of the scholars, the mystical bond remained unbroken in the silent hearts of the folk. The people continued to whisper the forbidden names in the shadows of the night, keeping the ancient and magical fire alive in secret. This era of suppression created a deep and lasting divide between the formal architecture of the church and the vibrant, lived experience of the peasant. While the scholars wrote of reason, the commoners still dreamed of the radiant crowns that could illuminate the path to the hidden and golden hoards. The battle for the soul of the devotion proved that the spirit of Saint Korona could not be easily tamed by imperial or clerical decrees. Even in the Age of Enlightenment, the mystery of the martyr remained a potent and uncontrollable force that resonated with the deepest longings of the human heart. As the year 1910 arrived, the long silence of the Aachen crypt was shattered by the rhythmic sound of heavy iron tools. Researchers, driven by a sacred curiosity, finally breached the hidden vault that had concealed the imperial secrets of the ancient and holy Etonian dynasty. Beneath the massive blocks of centuries-old marble, they discovered a magnificent reliquary crafted from the finest gold and delicate, shimmering ivory. This exquisite casket, hidden from the world's sight for generations, appeared as a radiant sunrise within the cold and dark shadows of the cathedral's deep and dusty foundations. The ivory panels were carved with a divine precision, depicting scenes of martyrdom that seemed to pulsate with a mysterious and living energy. Every golden filigree reflected the flickering light of the explorers' lanterns, proving that the glory of the saints had remained untarnished by the damp and silent earth. Within this majestic vessel lay the sacred remains of Viktor and Korona, the Eastern champions who had once fueled the mystical dreams of emperors. The discovery was not merely an archaeological event, but a profound spiritual awakening that bridged the modern age with the ancient and steadfast courage of Syria. The ivory carvings whispered tales of the palm trees and the blinding fire, serving as a visual bridge between two vastly different eras of faith. Scholars touched the cool, precious surfaces with trembling hands, recognizing the immense weight of the spiritual legacy that had been preserved within this silent, golden sanctuary. News of the spectacular find rippled through the hallowed halls of the cathedral and beyond, reaching the ears of believers and historians across Europe. The lost martyrs were no longer a myth found in crumbling manuscripts. but a tangible and radiant presence that demanded a new and profound respect. This golden and ivory reliquary stood as a defiant testimony against the fading of memory and the cold indifference of the secular and modern world. It proved that the light of the East could never be truly extinguished, as it had waited patiently in the dark to shine once more. As the sacred mahfaza was carefully lifted from its resting place, the spiritual connection between Aachen and the ancient desert was gloriously and permanently restored. The champions had returned from the shadows, ready to inspire a new generation with the eternal and shimmering truth of their two celestial crowns. In the year 1981, the sacred remains were brought before the cold, precise instruments of modern science for a profound examination. Within the sterile light of the laboratory, experts sought to unlock the ancient secrets hidden within the microscopic dust clinging to the holy bones. The investigation went beyond the physical structures of the skeletons, focusing instead on the invisible particles of the distant past. Scientists discovered traces of pollen and soil that did not belong to the damp forests of Europe, but whispered of a far more ancient and sun-drenched Eastern origin. These tiny grains of botanical history acted as silent witnesses, speaking of the dry winds of Syria and the scorched earth of the Levant. The dust spoke a language of absolute truth, confirming that the relics had indeed traveled from the very desert where the great martyrdom had once occurred. Every microscopic grain found within the crevices of the bone was a piece of a divine puzzle, connecting the modern world to ancient Damascus. The chemical analysis provided a bridge of factual evidence, proving that the tradition of the saints was not a mere myth, but a tangible and historical reality. The skeptics who had once questioned the authenticity of the imperial treasures were silenced by the undeniable testimony of the earth itself. The pollen of the Orient remained preserved for centuries, acting as a spiritual seal of authenticity that no human hand or deceptive mind could ever hope to forge. This scientific revelation transformed the reliquary into a living map of a journey that spanned across continents and through the long corridors of time. It was a moment where faith and reason embraced, as the laboratory results echoed the ancient hymns that had been sung in the Great Palace. The findings reinforced the spiritual weight of the relics, reminding the faithful that the blood of the martyrs had truly sanctified the ground. The invisible dust was treated with the same reverence as the golden shrine, for it carried the very essence of the land where the king walked. As the final reports were sealed, the legacy of Viktor and Korona emerged stronger and more vibrant than ever before in the modern age. The voice of the dust had confirmed the glory of the crowns, proving that the truth of the Spirit is written even in the smallest particles. The microscopic investigation reached a definitive peak as the forensic teams identified the distinct pollen of ancient cedar trees among the sacred dust. These biological markers were not mere particles. They were the undeniable and silent witnesses of the martyrs' origins in the sun-drenched landscapes of Syria. Within the cold laboratory, the presence of these Eastern plant remains acted as a divine signature, proving that the relics had once rested under the Levant sky. The scientific equipment confirmed what the ancient scrolls had long whispered, bridging the vast gap between the laboratory and the desert sands. The cedar of Lebanon, a symbol of strength and eternity in the Holy Scriptures, provided the ultimate evidence for the skeptics of the modern world. Its resilient pollen had survived the long journey across the Great Sea, remaining trapped within the crevices of the bone for nearly 2,000 years. Every slide viewed under the lens revealed a hidden map of the saints' movements, from the Roman provinces to the imperial halls of Aachen. This botanical evidence dismantled the walls of doubt, showing that the physical remains belonged to the same soil where the brave Viktor had once shed his blood. The researchers felt a profound sense of awe as they realized they were touching the very atmosphere of the 3rd century's ancient and holy ground. The history of the martyrs was no longer a beautiful myth, but a documented reality supported by the undeniable and living laws of the natural world. These forensic findings served as a new and powerful liturgy of truth for the faithful who had preserved the devotion through the centuries. They recognized that the same Creator who fashioned the cedar had also preserved the memory of his champions through the smallest and most humble grains of dusty earth. The verification of the Syrian origin added a deep layer of authenticity to the golden reliquary, making the presence of the saints even more tangible. The dust had spoken, and its testimony was as loud and clear as the thunder that had once echoed over the fiery furnace in Damascus. As the scientific community published its conclusions, the spiritual legacy of Viktor and Korona was anchored firmly in the bedrock of historical and forensic fact. The crowns of the martyrs were now supported by the evidence of the earth, proving that the light of truth remains eternally and perfectly visible. In the early months of the year 2020, a profound and eerie silence descended upon the bustling cities and the quiet villages of the entire world. A microscopic and invisible enemy began its relentless march across the borders, casting a heavy shadow of fear over all of modern humanity. As the global population retreated into the forced isolation of their homes, the digital wires of the internet started to vibrate with a strange discovery. The name of the unseen plague shared a mysterious linguistic root with a forgotten saint who had been buried deep within the imperial vaults. Suddenly, the name Korona was no longer just a term of scientific dread, but became a bridge to an ancient and powerful spiritual legacy. Millions of people, searching for hope in the darkness of the pandemic, discovered the story of the girl who had seen the 2 celestial and radiant crowns. This unexpected resurrection of her memory felt like a divine irony in a world that had largely forgotten the mystical power of the saints. From the silent cathedrals of Europe to the glowing screens of the distant Americas, the name of the Syrian martyr began to echo with a new, urgent meaning. People looked to the patroness of pandemics, not as a source of medical cure, but as a beacon of spiritual endurance through the long nights of trial. Her unwavering courage in the face of the Roman sword provided a timeless mirror for a generation facing its own invisible and terrifying biological furnace. The ancient basilica in Feltre and the Golden Shrine in Aachen became the focal points of a global and digital pilgrimage for the weary and the lost. Even those without faith found a strange comfort in the coincidence, realizing that the light of the past could still illuminate the present struggles. This modern awakening proved that the spirit of the martyrs cannot be confined to the dusty pages of history or the cold stone of a crypt. The invisible enemy had inadvertently summoned a celestial guardian, reminding the world that the crown of victory is often found in the midst of the deepest suffering. As the world struggled to breathe, the ancient hymns of the Stephana returned to the hearts of the faithful across the vast and interconnected globe. The rebirth of her name was a sign that the King of Kings still watches over his people, even when the shadows seem to cover the earth. In the age of instant information and global digital connection, the ancient name of Korona underwent a sudden and profound transformation within the modern consciousness. Media outlets and social platforms began to broadcast her story, bestowing upon her the contemporary title of the sovereign patroness of the great pandemic. This new role was not born from the dusty halls of academia. but from the desperate and sincere hearts of a world seeking spiritual anchors. Modern folk piety embraced the Syrian martyr, seeing her as a celestial bridge that could carry human prayers through the silent and terrifying clouds of the invisible virus. From the bustling streets of Rome to the quiet homes in the Americas, her image was shared across millions of glowing screens as a symbol of hope. She was no longer a forgotten relic of the imperial past, but a living guardian whose presence felt remarkably relevant to a fearful 21st century humanity. The pandemic saint label acted as a divine spark, igniting a renewed interest in the ancient traditions of martyrdom and spiritual endurance. People who had never stepped into a cathedral found themselves drawn to the story of the girl who had seen the two crowns descending from the radiant, eternal heavens. This rapid cultural canonization proved that the spirit of the saints can adapt to the needs of any era, no matter how technological or secular. Korona became a beacon of light in the darkness of the lockdowns, proving that the ancient martyrs still possess the power to comfort the modern and weary soul. While scholars debated the historical nuances, the faithful and the curious alike created a global and digital prayer chain that spanned across every continent. The label was a testament to the enduring human need for a sacred protector who understands the bitter pain of isolation and the heavy weight of the world's suffering. In the quiet aisles of the Aachen Cathedral, the golden reliquary seemed to glow with a renewed intensity as the world's attention turned toward it. The pandemic saint had emerged from the shadows of history to stand at the very center of a global crisis, offering a timeless and celestial perspective on the trial. Thus, the name that once commanded the respect of Byzantine emperors now commanded the attention of the modern, interconnected world through the vast digital waves. The transition was complete, and Saint Korona began her new mission as the radiant guardian of a generation facing its own invisible and dark biological furnace. As the world grappled with the invisible weight of the pandemic, the ancient city of Aachen became a silent beacon of celestial hope. Behind the heavy stone walls of the cathedral, the golden shrine of Saint Korona stood ready to receive the heavy burdens of a fearful, modern humanity. The irony of the shared name created a profound spiritual magnetism, drawing the attention of millions to this once-forgotten imperial vault. While the laboratories of the world searched for a cure, the faithful looked toward the radiant crowns of the East, seeking a fortitude that transcended biological and earthly limits. Due to the strict requirements of the era, the physical pilgrimages were replaced by a quiet, reverent stream of local believers and digital witnesses. Each person who approached the golden reliquary brought with them the collective anxiety of a globe, seeking shelter under the mantle of the brave and steadfast martyrs. The atmosphere within the Palatine Chapel was thick with the scent of ancient incense and the palpable tension of a civilization in crisis. Worshippers knelt before the ivory panels, finding a strange comfort in the eyes of the painted saints who had survived their own fiery and Roman trials long ago. This modern encounter with the relics was not driven by simple superstition, but by a deep human need for a sacred narrative of victory. The crown of the virus was met by the crown of the saint, creating a divine dialogue between the temporal suffering and the eternal reward of the king. Church officials in Aachen recognized the immense weight of this historical moment, carefully opening the path for a new generation to witness the treasures. The golden shrine, hidden for centuries under marble slabs, now shone with a brilliance that seemed to challenge the very shadows of the global and dark pandemic. Every prayer whispered in the shadows of the cathedral echoed the ancient litanies of Antioch and the chants of Constantinople from the distant past. The spiritual connection between the Syrian desert and the German heartland was renewed, proving that the light of the martyrs is a fire that never truly fades. As the pilgrims departed from the presence of the relics, they carried with them a spark of invincible hope into the cold, modern night. The visit to the shrine of Korona reminded the world that while empires and viruses may fall, the radiant glory of the Spirit remains eternally and perfectly whole. In the sun-drenched streets of Castelfidardo, the arrival of the 14th of May marks a sacred awakening of ancient and holy traditions. Every year, the Italian people gather with a fervent devotion to celebrate the glorious victory of Viktor and Korona over the fading shadows of the pagan world. The city, perched elegantly upon the verdant hills, transforms into a vibrant stage of liturgical splendor and profound spiritual joy. Golden banners flicker in the warm Mediterranean breeze, carrying the names of the Syrian martyrs through the narrow alleys where the echoes of the medieval past still resonate deeply. As the grand procession begins, a magnificent and unquenchable fire is ignited, symbolizing the eternal light that once illuminated the dark Roman furnace. This holy flame is carried with absolute reverence, representing the indestructible spirit of the girl who saw the crowns and the soldier who chose the celestial king. The melodic ringing of the church bells harmonizes with the rhythmic chanting of the faithful, creating a divine symphony that reaches toward the heavens. For the citizens of Castelfidardo, the martyrs are not distant historical figures, but living guardians who walk beside them through the challenges of the modern and changing world. In the central square, the icons of the duo are adorned with fresh flowers and precious fabrics, reflecting the deep gratitude of the community. Every prayer offered during this solemn hour is a bridge connecting the rugged Italian soil with the golden streets of the New Jerusalem, where the champions now reign forever. Children and elders alike stand in awe of the flickering candles, their faces illuminated by the same radiant hope that once warmed the Syrian desert. This celebration is a defiant declaration that neither time nor the indifference of the secular age can ever extinguish the memory of the holy and brave sacrifice. The night air is filled with the fragrance of incense and the sound of ancient litanies, weaving a tapestry of faith that unites the generations. The unquenchable fire of the celebration acts as a spiritual lighthouse, guiding the souls of the weary toward the promise of an eternal and magnificent heavenly kingdom. As the stars emerge over the quiet hills of Italy, the lights of Castelfidardo continue to burn with a celestial and steady brilliance. The 14th of May remains a testament to the enduring power of the martyrs, proving that their glorious legacy is a flame that will shine brightly until the end of time. Within the vast and magnificent halls of the world's great galleries, the masterful brush of Jacopo Bassano captures the eternal essence of the martyrs. His painting is not merely a depiction of history, but a profound and spiritual window into the very soul of the great and holy Syrian sacrifice. The artist uses a dramatic play of light and shadow, known as chiaroscuro, to highlight the divine tension between the earth and the sky. Viktor stands as a pillar of martial strength, while Korona's gentle form radiates a celestial grace that seems to pierce the dark and oppressive Roman night. Every fold of their garments and every expression on their noble faces, Obiti, tells a story of an unyielding and sacred commitment to the truth. Bassano skillfully weaves the earthly reality of the Roman soldier with the ethereal promise of the young girl's vision, creating a masterpiece of divine and human harmony. In the background, the subtle details of the palm trees, and the distant hills of the Orient serve as silent witnesses to their courage. The painter captures the precise moment when the physical pain of the furnace is systematically conquered by the radiant and overwhelming hope of the coming heavenly and eternal kingdom. The two golden crowns are rendered with such a delicate and shimmering brilliance that they appear to float within the actual space of the canvas. They are the focal point of the composition, drawing the viewer's eye toward the ultimate reward that awaits those who remain faithful through the fiery trials. Bassano's choice of colors, from the deep crimson of the martyr's blood to the celestial blues of the sky, evokes a profound emotional and spiritual response. The painting acts as a visual liturgy, inviting the observer to participate in the sacred mystery of a faith that successfully defied the might of an empire. Through this artistic lens, the story of Viktor and Korona is preserved for all future generations as a testament to the power of the Spirit. The canvas becomes a living icon, proving that the beauty of the martyr's witness can be felt as deeply through art as through the spoken and ancient word. As the light reflects off the varnish of the old masterpiece, the legacy of the saints continues to inspire the hearts of the modern world. Bassano's vision remains a golden bridge, connecting the dusty roads of the 3rd century with the timeless search for truth in the radiant and infinite heavens. Within the dust-covered corridors of the San Marco Library in Venice, a miraculous discovery brought the ancient past to life. Scholars unearthed fragile parchment scrolls, revealing the complex musical notations of a lost medieval liturgy dedicated to the glorious and unwavering memory of Viktor and Korona. These sacred melodies, composed by anonymous monks in the flickering light of candles, acted as a spiritual bridge across the centuries. The notations were not merely ink on paper, but a vibrant and percussive echo of the deep devotion that once filled the magnificent vaulted cathedrals. As the first notes were transcribed by modern experts, the haunting beauty of the Gregorian chants filled the silent and academic halls once again. The music captured the rhythmic intensity of the Roman furnace and the ethereal lightness of the two golden crowns descending from the radiant heavens. The compositions reflected a unique blend of Byzantine mysticism and the rising polyphonic traditions of the Western European world. Every vocal line was designed to elevate the human soul, turning the story of the Syrian martyrs into a majestic and auditory icon of the eternal and holy King. In the delicate phrasing of the Stephana hymns, the listener could almost feel the salt-laden winds of the Adriatic meeting the dry desert heat. The music served as a divine vessel, carrying the fragrance of the East into the heart of the most powerful maritime republic in history. This rediscovered repertoire provided a profound and new perspective on how the medieval faithful experienced the sacred presence of the saints. They did not just read the stories, they sang the suffering and the victory, weaving the martyr's testimony into the very breath of their daily lives. Performance of these ancient chants in the modern age has restored a lost dimension of the cult's historical and artistic grandeur. The vibrations of the medieval pipes and voices prove that the legacy of Viktor and Korona is a symphony that the passing of time could never truly silence. As the final chords of the ancient hymns resonate through the grand libraries of Venice, the spiritual circle is finally and gloriously closed. The music of the past remains a living testament to the faith, ensuring that the light of the martyrs will shine through the infinite power of song. The philosophy of the two crowns represents the ultimate transformation of human suffering into a radiant, celestial victory. It is a profound mystery where the weight of the Roman chains is systematically exchanged for the lightness of a golden and eternal promise from the King of Kings. Within this sacred framework, the fiery furnace of Damascus was not an end. but a necessary crucible for the soul's refinement. The pain endured by Viktor and Korona served as the dark canvas upon which the brilliant light of their unwavering and holy faith was perfectly painted. To the secular world, their sacrifice appeared as a tragic defeat. Yet to the eyes of the Spirit, it was a coronation. They demonstrated that true power does not reside in the sharp edge of the sword, but in the absolute surrender to a divine and higher truth. The crown of thorns, worn in the midst of the bitter and physical trial, gradually morphed into the shimmering crown of glory. This transition teaches us that every wound received in the name of the good becomes a precious jewel in the architecture of the coming heavenly and magnificent kingdom. Korona's vision of the descending crowns provided a bridge between the temporary agony of the body and the permanent ecstasy of the soul. She understood that the shadows of the empire were fleeting, while the radiance of the martyrs' reward was fixed forever in the infinite heavens. The philosophy of their legacy challenges the modern mind to look beyond the immediate comfort of the material and mortal world. It invites the seeker to find meaning in the sacrifice, recognizing that the greatest treasures are often found within the most challenging and dark moments of our human existence. Through the centuries, this dual crown has remained a symbol of hope for all those who face their own internal and external furnaces. The legacy of Viktor and Korona proves that the spirit can conquer the grave, turning the dust of the desert into the gold of a sanctuary. As the final echoes of their story resonate through time, the philosophy of the two crowns stands as an invincible monument of light. Pain is temporary, but the victory of the soul is eternal, shining with a brilliance that outlasts the sun and the stars of the world. The epic journey that began in the sun-scorched arenas of ancient Damascus has finally reached the infinite and glowing horizons of the digital age. The unyielding light of Viktor and Korona, once carried through secret catacombs, now vibrates across the vast and invisible networks of the modern world. From the heavy silence of the Syrian desert to the golden vaults of Aachen, their story remains a testament to the indestructible power of faith. Time has claimed empires, and the Roman legions have long faded into dust. Yet the names of the two champions continue to resonate. In the face of modern plagues and the chaotic noise of a secular world, the vision of the descending crowns remains a beacon of hope. This eternal victory is not anchored in stone or gold, but in the living hearts of those who still believe in the ultimate truth. The blood of the martyrs, once spilled upon the parched earth, has become a spiritual river that nourishes the weary souls of every generation. Across centuries of war, peace, and discovery, the presence of the Stratolates and his companion has acted as a silent and holy guardian. Today, their icons appear on flickering screens, just as they once adorned the marble walls of Byzantine palaces and Alpine shrines. The medium of the message has changed, but the radiant essence of their courage remains as pure and powerful as the fierce Syrian sun in the ancient sky. This finale is not an ending, but a glorious transition into the collective memory of a global and interconnected humanity. The martyrs stand at the crossroads of history, inviting every seeker to look beyond the temporary shadows and toward the shimmering, eternal light of the great and holy King. As the final bells of the great cathedrals ring out in honor of their sacrifice, the spiritual circle is perfectly and majestically closed. The two crowns have found their place among the stars, proving that a life surrendered for the truth is a life that will never truly die. The light of Viktor and Korona continues its silent watch over the world, promising that every trial is but a path to a crown. Their story remains an invincible monument of grace, shining with a brilliance that will outlast the sun and endure until the very end of time. O holy martyrs, Viktor and Korona, radiant witnesses of unshakable faith, we come before you with humble hearts. In a world filled with confusion and fear, remind us that true courage is born not from power, but from steadfast trust in Christ, our eternal King. Brave Saint Viktor, soldier of the earthly empire who became a warrior of heaven, strengthen our spirits when we face trials. When our faith is tested by suffering, injustice, or doubt, help us stand firm with the same courage that guided you through fire, chains, and persecution. Blessed Saint Korona, young yet fearless in your devotion, teach us that holiness is not measured by age, but by love. Inspire our hearts to follow Christ with the same purity and fearless faith that led you to embrace martyrdom with peace and serenity. O glorious martyrs, you who stood together in faith, even when the world demanded silence, intercede for us before the throne of God. Help us remain faithful witnesses in our own time, speaking truth with courage and living the gospel without fear. When our lives are shaken by uncertainty, illness, or loss, remind us that earthly suffering is never the final chapter. Your victory was not in escaping death, but in transforming suffering into eternal glory through your unwavering devotion to Christ. Saint Viktor, who faced the cruelty of the Roman world with calm strength, teach us patience in adversity. When anger, fear, or despair rise within us, guide our hearts back to the quiet courage that grows from faith and trust in God's eternal plan. Saint Korona, crowned with heavenly honor for your witness, pray for those who feel weak or forgotten. Remind every troubled soul that God sees even the smallest act of faith, and that no sacrifice offered for truth and love is ever lost. Holy martyrs of Damascus, whose testimony crossed centuries and continents, watch over our families, our homes, and our communities. Protect us from despair and strengthen our hearts so that we may carry the light of Christ into a world longing for hope. Through your intercession, may our faith become bold, our love become generous, and our hearts become fearless. Help us walk the path of righteousness with humility and perseverance, remembering always that the crown of heaven belongs to those who remain faithful. Saints Viktor and Korona, victorious servants of Christ, pray for us in our struggles and guide us toward the eternal kingdom. May our lives reflect the same courage, devotion, and faith that led you to everlasting glory. In the presence of God, amen.